How's it going, guys? Thank you so much for joining us this morning. If you guys could take your seats and grab the last coffee, that'd be much appreciated. I just wanted to quickly run through why we're here and what the event, kind of what we're trying to do with this event, briefly, if that's all right. So let's fly through. So this is the three guys that kind of generally kind of try and get this together every week. Rick, who's the bearded guy on the right, and works in DoubleClick. Aidan, who's the even more bearded man, who's standing over there, and works in the agency team, and I work in the DoubleClick team. And a while ago, we kind of sat down and had a chat and thought about the kind of things that were causing us kind of some concern in the industry, but also the things that we got really excited about and wanted to learn more about. And we did what most guys do and kind of went for a pint. And had a number of chats and kind of thought, you know, what's the best way to, given the resource we have in Google, what's the best way to enable this conversation? And what's a quick question for everyone? What does Southwest Airlines, the Marine Corps, Iron Man, and Future Data have in common? The hint is the big picture of the pub. They were all invented, or such, if you call it invented, in the pub. So we thought, let's have an event where we just host as many people and as many good minds as possible without selling to you guys Google solutions. Because we know it's quite often that you come to these events and you sit in these rooms and people from Google or YouTube or DoubleClick stand up and try and get you to use our products, which is fine. It's completely acceptable. But there is a number of events, such as Firestarters, I think, is a really, really good event from the planning community that just gets great minds from the agency world and client world to talk about the great work in planning, and it's really developed to a really interesting event because it's not a sell. So we really hoped Future Data would not become a kind of get Googlers up to kind of speak and pitch all the time. We will leverage the fact that we've got great speakers in Google, but it will absolutely not be a sell. So please hold us to that commitment. We also wanted to get as many people as possible from client side and agency side. So please get in contact with us if you guys have anyone in particular that is a good speaker. Please keep the communication coming via the hashtag Future Data, which we're going to keep continuing to use. So far we've run 4 Future Data events. We generally have between just over 100 people in the room every time. We generally have about 400 or so people watching live on a Hangout, and we generally have a significant communication via the hashtag that we're kind of constantly promoting. We do want to keep that going, so please enable with the hashtag and start the communication. What's next? We asked you guys at the start of the year to give us four titles that you'd like to run through. So today is building a data-centric organization, which was the highest voted request on what people want to know about. The next was enabling best-in-class planning and strategy from data. And there was a few others that didn't really that weren't really as strongly requested. So the next event will be that theme. We will ask you guys again in the next few months what else you want to hear about again. So please let us know. But we're also trying to, if we can encourage and enable this community, we have about 600 email addresses from all the different events and sign-ups and tweets. And we really want to get to the stage where people are just finding great articles and tweeting about it, posting it to Google+, and kind of encouraging this conversation throughout. Lastly, yeah, so we kind of thought about who we are, and the best way I thought about it is we're kind of like the pub landlord, right? Because we're not really doing anything except for we've got this nice building that we can host, and we've got some salmon, although there wasn't many plates for a while, and we've got a nice facility to use to host other people to have a conversation. So maybe without the grumpy face, but I'd say the three of us just hope to enable this conversation and keep it going for the next while. So thanks very much for coming. It is really, really appreciated to have your time, especially given it's an entire half day. I wanted to introduce Nigel Gwilliam, who's one of the leading consultants in the industry and works very closely with the IPA, who's kindly agreed to be the host throughout the day. So thanks very much for coming, and here's Nigel.
Thanks very much, Dave. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Future of Data. I've been asked to regularly repeat the hashtag Future of Data, which is a very easy one to remember given the event is Future of Data, hashtag Future of Data. There we go. How's that for a start, chaps? Also, welcome to those live streaming via Google Plus Hangout. So there are quite a few people joining us today remotely, which is always great. You're seeing technology in action. We've got a fantastic lineup for you today. A series of speakers coming up, 3 before the break, 3 after the break. They're going to give you 20-minute slots, nice, short, concise. We're going to pack a lot in. But to get things started, Dave asked me to kind of set the scene a little bit, do a bit of an introduction, a bit of perhaps a macro view type thing. And I was fortunate enough to return to South by Southwest Interactive in March this year. So there's going to be a tiny bit of audience participation. I'm not going to single anyone out, but can you just put your hands up when I ask a couple of things? So does anyone know what South by Southwest Interactive is? Okay, a few don't. Right, okay. So I just want to just gauge things a little bit. It's fine. So basically, it's a 5-day festival in Austin, Texas. Started as a music festival, turned into music and film. Been around about 27 years. A few years after the start, they launched an interactive festival, and it is absolutely jam-packed with emerging technology and innovation talks. There's a huge variety of content. It's absolutely amazing, really high-profile speakers. And normally, it's very much pro-technology, utopian, everything's going to be solved, all of the world's problems, all of human culture and society and economics are going to be solved by technology. Hugely positive, hugely optimistic. But this year was very different. And it actually dovetails very nicely with the concept of data and the big theme behind the future of data today, which is building a data-centric organization, although not perhaps how you might think. So I'm just going to take you on a little journey to set the scene. So as I was saying, South by Southwest, normally it's about things like wearable computing, Android launching an operating system for wearables, 3D printing. Here we have Oreo cookies where you can get bespoke 3D printers, printed cookies dependent on what's being tweeted. You've got things like the kind of championing of Oculus Rift, which is this immersive virtual technology headset. So you get this kind of complete immersive display sold to Facebook for $2 billion. So all of this kind of normal theme of South by Southwest was kind of there. But there was a very particular counter trend, a very current issue, and one that pertains very closely to the issue of data. Okay, so these 3 slides I'm going to show you in quick succession. Okay, number 1 is chat. Some of you will probably recognize him, Julian Assange. Number 2 is chat, Edward Snowden. Probably know the name, probably know something about whistleblowing, maybe not a huge amount more than that, some of you more than others. And the third one's this chap. Does anyone know who this is? I've yet to see anyone who knows who this guy is. No? Yeah? Very good, you're the first. This was obviously a very educated audience. So this is Glenn Greenwald, exactly right, sir. And he was the freelance journalist working for The Guardian who broke the Snowden whistleblower story. Okay, and the very interesting thing is not just the theme is the same in all of their talks that took place at South by. Okay, it was also that none of them were there. Okay, so Julian Assange, as we know, is in the Ecuadorian embassy, actually around the corner from the IPA headquarters. So I went all the way to Texas to listen to a guy who was basically around the corner. Edward Snowden is at large in Russia, too frightened to return to the States, and Glenn Greenwald lives in Rio in Brazil, doesn't like to return often to the States, and reported in The Guardian earlier this week would not come to this country. Okay, so none of those 3 speakers were actually there in Austin, which is fascinating because that's never happened before to my knowledge, and suddenly like buses we've got 3 at once. And this is because it's a very, very contentious issue that they were talking about. And before I talk about it at length, I have to admit I was a little bit, jaded about the concept. Okay, I knew Assange was talking, don't have a huge amount of time for him, but I thought, what is this, Snowden? Okay, so he's in Russia, he's whistleblew something around surveillance programs and government data being leaked, but he's in Russia, that well-known hotbed of human rights championship. It all sounds a bit fishy, a bit hooky to me. So it was a kind of he was on screen. The interviewer said, after a kind of Q&A session between the 2 of them, he said, we're going to open up to the audience, but before we do, we're going to offer this guy first question. Now, given that someone knows Glenn Greenwald, someone will definitely know who this is, so we won't go through the rigmarole. This is Tim Berners-Lee, invented the web, okay? And he invented it almost exactly 25 years ago, not the internet, but the web, the graphical interface. And he was in another auditorium giving a talk, so he couldn't be there. But he said he had a question for Snowden, and the interviewer said, and he's got a personal message for you, Edward Snowden. He said, thank you for what you've done. Now this guy is internet royalty, okay? His views are unimpeachable. He invented the web, he never cashed in, he continues to champion human rights via the internet and it maximizing the potential for human society. And he was thanking Edward Snowden and went on to ask him a question about governance of national surveillance programs. And this builds to what this is all about, okay? Hands up who's heard of Prism? Okay, my God, it's very knowledgeable. I'm slightly worried now. You might know more about all of this than me. So this was the big theme. This was the big area of Snowden's leaks from the NSA, and it's basically a mass clandestine data collection program. Okay, the NSA and their junior partners, GCHQ, our counterparts, they are very much data-centric organizations. Okay, they are very much, in many respects, in a slightly perverse respect, what you want to aspire to be in terms of data collection, although arguably not what data you should collect and what you do with it. But in terms of what they have championed, it is to collect as much information as possible. Unfortunately, it's very personal information, it's of everyone, and how they went about it was not very well supervised. It all began with the 9/11 attacks, unfortunately, the aftermath of that. The Patriot Act was introduced, and effectively the NSA, which had existed for many years, was given a free hand to collect information with very little oversight. Okay, so they basically had to ask a secret court if they could go to Google or Facebook or Microsoft and request data. And the secret court always gave them permission. They would go collect the data, and the organizations, the companies, would have to give it to them. And this was the big expose. Okay. But there are other things that you may not be so aware of. So this relates to our hosts today. They were the victims of interference from the government spooks. This relates to something called Surveillance Program Muscular. Okay, it's a very interesting name. It has counterparts called things like Incensor and Turmoil. I think the spies have a slight kind of preoccupation with kind of slightly sexy, kind of, almost homoerotic naming conventions, if you ask me. But nonetheless, the fundamentals of this were that the public internet has degrees of encryption within it when you interface with the Google front end. So the GFE in the middle there is the Google front end. But what they discovered, the spooks, was that the Google Cloud, and indeed the Yahoo Cloud, which is a virtual concept but is made up of physical assets, data centers, right, which are those DCs there. The individual data centers are connected via fiber optic cable and other telecommunications network that they don't own. Google and Yahoo don't own them. They lease them from companies, okay, telecommunications companies. So the GCHQ went to an unspecified British telecommunications company with basically a giant suction cup, okay, and said, we'd like you to stick this into the communications between Google's data centers, because they discovered that all of that data was entirely unencrypted. Okay, so if you used any Google service in the first half of 2013, before they discovered this, everything that you did, right, was sucked out, unencrypted, taken out, and stored in the NSA's own data center in Fort Meade in Maryland, and continues to reside there, and will perhaps reside there indefinitely. So if perhaps you had a medical condition that you were writing to someone about, perhaps your doctor, if you were having an illicit relationship, like Eric Schmidt actually had, which is interesting, we'll come on to that in a minute. Sorry guys for slagging off the boss. If you were perhaps thinking about job interviews and stuff, you're not going to use your work account to talk to someone about job interviews. All of that information, unencrypted, is stored by the spooks in Maryland. Now, almost certainly nothing's going to happen with that, but it drew out some really serious issues, as one could imagine. You're all data literate people here today. And crucially, Google and Yahoo were understandably incandescent when they found out about this. Okay, they knew about Prism because they were getting asked for data. They didn't know this back end existed. And if you look, there's a little smiley face at the bottom of the post-it note. That particularly pissed them off. Okay, the spies were basically laughing at them. Right, they had said, we've hoodwinked them. We've got the unencrypted data. Right, so this is what this whole subject is about. It is all about data. It is all about data collection on an absolutely vast scale. And unfortunately, with all of that power comes great responsibility that wasn't really being delivered. Okay? Snowden was by far and away the most charismatic of the speakers. And what he was really there to talk about was a call to arms. He was basically saying, we can't rely on legislators, the government, to kind of create oversight themselves. We need technology-based solutions. We need you, the audience of the geeks, the tech geeks at South by Southwest, the great innovators, the entrepreneurs. We need you to create startups, to create new technologies that deliver levels of encryption that prevent this mass surveillance. Okay, we are going to bear the consequences of that. All right. Now, interestingly, again, with regard to our hosts here, Eric Schmidt was also one of the three most powerful men at Google. was also on stage, and his talk also featured around this subject. And he basically sat there like the president of the world and said, "It's okay, guys, we got this one for you. You know, we know about this now. We're encrypting everything. We're going to look after your data. We're the good guys now." Okay, which is kind of interesting, right? And it poses a question, right? One of my favorite graphic novels, The Watchmen, right? Who watches the Watchmen? The spies are the Watchmen. Who watches the Watchmen? Google's basically going, "Sorry, guys, but you know, we got this." And the other companies similar to them are saying the same thing. But it poses the question, who watches the Watchmen watching the Watchmen? And if you smoke too much weed, you then say that again and again, and you go off into a bit of a rabbit hole. Nonetheless, right, let's think about where Eric Schmidt was 5 years ago, okay, what he was talking about 5 years ago. If you have something that you don't want anyone to know, maybe you shouldn't be doing it in the first place. What did Google aspire to do? Something fantastic. Not the do no evil thing. Something fantastic. They aspire to organize all of the world's information. Right? Well, all of the world's information includes a lot of very private information. Okay, and it's very, very sensitive stuff in different areas. And with that comes fantastic amounts of responsibility. Okay, and that is true for all of you that aspire to be data-led organizations as well. There is huge power, huge upside, but with it comes huge responsibility. And there are people now looking at far more intently at this whole area because of what's happened with the Snowden affair. All right? Questions for our industry. We thrive on online data. I don't need to kind of labor the point here for you guys, right? Do you think that the legislators, Joe Public, will go, "Wow, all the spies are up to something. We don't need to worry about those e-commerce and advertising people anymore"? I can tell you it won't. We'll just simply be tarred with the same brush. Okay? This is Viviane Reding. She's European Commissioner for Justice. She has responsibility for data protection in Europe, within the which obviously the UK resides within. Okay, she hated Facebook particularly, and all advertising and data-led models, particularly those from an Anglo-Saxon background, even before any of this came out. Okay, this is what she said after it did, when her mate Angela Merkel discovered she was having her phone bugged by the NSA, okay, amongst many other things. Strong data protection rules must be Europe's trademark. Following the US data spying scandals, there we go, data protection is more than ever a competitive advantage. Data protection. The EU are introducing new legislation next year, which in its current form will fundamentally change the entire landscape of data regulation within Europe, okay, and she is really pissed off after all this stuff came out. This is a guy called Ben Page. If we think about, he's CEO of Ipsos Mori, the pollsters, and he presented at an IPA Touchpoints event a couple of months back. Fantastic public speaker. He pulled up something about the human, if you like, the consumer, the people side of this. Forget the legislators for a minute. Where are they at? Okay. He said, well, there's a paradox. On the one hand, nearly 2/3, if asked, want less data collected about them. Okay. But by the same token, 3/4 have never changed the default privacy setting. All right? But that is key. We, on the whole, human beings, it's all to do with behavioral economics, we very rarely change the default settings on things. Viviane Reding wants to change the default to everyone being opted out, and you have to choose to have data collected about you. Right? Bugger all people will do that if that comes to pass. Martin Sorrell talking at Adweek last month. Don't underestimate the impact of Snowden revelations amongst consumers. Okay, these are big issues. How much of this data-rich environment is this going to change? Right? We know data is hugely important to Google. There are now competing forces at work. It used to be very straightforward. The great thinking amongst the leviathans and the kind of evangelists of Silicon Valley were, we will pay for new technology with privacy. Privacy is perhaps coming to an end. Zuckerberg had Zuckerberg's law of sharing. We're willing to share twice as much about ourselves every year compared to the previous year. Okay, but now Zuckerberg, Facebook, they've bought WhatsApp. Okay, WhatsApp, $19 billion. WhatsApp, interestingly, collects no data about you. Right? It's fundamental to the WhatsApp service. They collect next to nothing about you because they don't have an ad model. They don't have an advertising model. So they don't need to collect the data that cuts people up to serve back to customers, that makes the business, Facebook, the Google, or in this case WhatsApp, the money. They don't make money like that. So it fundamentally changes matters. Okay? Deleting should be a default. This is a whole new area. Okay, this is Evan Spiegel, the founder of Snapchat. Okay, he is 23, lives with his dad. He created a business that he refused to sell to Facebook for $3 billion. Okay, the implications of how people use Snapchat, and the idea of deleting, although it doesn't delete it, fundamentally changes things. So I hope that's given you a sense of the scale and importance of data as a subject, and also the huge way that legislation is changing and that consumer behavior is changing, and how that's been fast-tracked by the Snowden surveillance whistleblowing scandals. This is a massive area, right? So that's given you a hope, a broad, slightly dystopian perhaps, introductory concept to the whole space. What we're going to do now is move on and focus into the talks that we have for you today. So I'm just going to show you a little slide, last one up. This isn't me, but this is what goes wrong with Snapchat when you think information is being deleted and it isn't. It took me a long while to find a slide I could show that was humorous, that wasn't like sexist, because almost all the pictures on Google Images are of women's cleavages with bits pixelated out, because that's mainly what gets captured on Snapchat as far as I can work out. But this isn't me, by the way. My muffin tops are bigger than that. So, so thank you very much. I'm now going to introduce Martin McNulty from Forward 3D. Martin is the CEO of Forward 3D. He has, according to his LinkedIn profile, which I'm sure is true, he is a CEO with outstanding online marketing and business strategy skills gained from a broad range of sectors. Martin, over to you. Thank you very much.
Wow, what an incredibly uplifting introduction to data. Now I'm going to tell you to just exploit it mercilessly. All right, so I'm Martin McNulty. I'm CEO of Forward 3D. But before I talk about building a data-centric organization, I think in the spirit of that somewhat somber introduction, I have to make a confession as well. So I have to talk about something that I did before I was CEO that I'm not really very proud of. But I figure, I'm amongst friends, so I can tell you guys. So in a former life, I was a ticket tout. So when your little daughter desperately wants tickets for Rhiannon, or when the die-hard football fan needs that cup final ticket, I was there, taking as much money from that person as possible, shamelessly exploiting them. But of course, I wasn't wearing a sheepskin jacket. I had the cloak of respectability because I was backed by a big VC. So some of you might have heard of StubHub. Anyone heard of StubHub? Yep. Okay. I didn't work for StubHub. I worked for a clone of StubHub. But that's pretty much how it works in the VC world. Take a good idea, put money into it, yada yada. So that's what I did. I was an online ticket tout. But I'm telling you this because this is kind of where my exposure to data really began, and it's kind of worth understanding it. So, do any of you recognize this graph? Obviously not. It's a bit of a weird graph. So this is the graph of demand for a concert, and it's a kind of a weird graph. So essentially, before a concert goes on sale, nobody wants concert tickets because you can't get any concert tickets. And then Beyonce announces that she's going to be at the O2, and then there's this colossal spike, and then it sells out in 3 minutes, or Ticketmaster crashes, and then it tails off really quickly, and then nothing happens, and then the shows start at the O2, and that's how it goes, and that's the kind of demand cycle that you go through. So if you're an online marketer, and I'm sure some of you are online marketers, just how do you optimize for that? How do you pick your keywords? You've got a day maybe at the on sale where demand is just going completely nuts and you can't actually sell anything because it's sold out, yada yada yada. And then it dips and then it gradually goes back up again, and it's just incredibly difficult to take advantage of that. So I'd walked into a job being a tout for a company, and I immediately learnt of this issue, and nothing that I'd learnt in my former jobs told me how to deal with this. And then there was another problem, which was we weren't exactly the only people out there selling tickets. There was this other company that was kind of established that knew how to resell things, that had scale, that was the marketplace. And then there was another issue, which is if you have got a spare ticket for Festival and you sell it on eBay, you'll sell it as an individual, and you won't be as greedy as most of the people that sell on resale platforms. most of which are professional organizations. So we had this triple problem. We had a really strange cycle of demand, we had a massive incumbent who was way better than us, and all of their tickets were cheaper than ours. And I didn't really know what to do. So obviously the first thing I did was I fired my agency. So I had a big networked agency that was running pay-per-click for me and display and social and yada, yada, yada. And I thought, none of these guys have got a solution to this problem. So what I'm actually going to do is run all my marketing through an affiliate, and I'll pay them on results. So if it's difficult and they can't do it, I don't care because I don't pay them. And that was the first thing I thought to do. And I'd been exposed to these guys called Traffic Broker, when I worked at Skype and eBay and Netflix, and they were pretty good. But they actually surprised me because they said, why don't you start using data to try and solve this problem? And I thought, well, that sounds kind of logical, but I didn't really know what they meant. And they said, well, here's where you are today. So you've got a bunch of listings on your site. We might have 300 concerts available at any one time. You're then picking keywords, and you're then deciding bids on the basis of these listings. And you're probably guessing. You have no idea what the big events are, the small events are, etc., etc. Why don't you look at it another way? So what you could do is you could take all the data off your site, you could scrape it, you could go to back end, you could turn it into a product feed. So it was really logical, so you could see that Bruce Springsteen was playing at the O2 on the 17th of September, and it was a gold class ticket. So you had some intelligence around it. Then they did something really cool, which I'd never thought of doing. They took that product feed and they put it through eBay's API. So eBay's API, if you're a power seller, you can watch items being sold, and you can figure out how many transactions are going on, what the average price is, and that's exactly what they did. So they pushed it through eBay's API, and then, whoops, and then as a consequence of that, sorry, it's a bit slow. Then as a consequence of that, I was basically able to get my guys to write a query which says, if the volume of an event is over X, if it's a big event, and our seller price is lower than the bid price on eBay, then I should probably be promoting this, probably through AdWords. And it was kind of amazing, like a light came on in my head, which was, this is nothing to do with keywords. This is everything to do with all of the information that resides outside of that kind of media data. And so I looked at this affiliate organization in a different light, and things started to appeal to me. So what I didn't care about was kind of bullshit pitches where people talk about strategy, because it doesn't mean anything. And I didn't really care about expressions like leveraging synergies across channels, which you hear all the time, which doesn't mean anything. And I didn't care about best-in-class technology. I cared about two things that these guys did. And they did these two things. They were able to query data, and then they were able to link marketing actions related to that data. That was their pitch. That was what they did. And that was a really different way of running an organization. And kind of to badly paraphrase, misparaphrase the Remington guy, I liked it so much that I joined the company. So I left my world of being a ticket tout and went clean. And I decided to take this affiliate company and turn it into an agency. And we turned it into a data-centric agency. So that's my kind of introduction over. So now I'm going to talk about three things that go on at Forward 3D that I think are relevant to this topic. So I'm going to talk about platforms, I'm going to talk about people, and I'm going to talk about culture. So if we kick off with platforms, I'm sure you've seen this type of graphic before. There's loads of them. And what they're doing is they're mapping all of the different providers kind of in the media landscape. And my particular area of interest are these kind of tools over here, and these tools, and these tools. So kind of marketing platforms. So does anybody use a bid management platform? Just raise your hand. Okay. Anybody use, I don't know, Kenshu? Okay, you're going to get some stick later. Anybody here from Kenshu? Yes. Okay. All right. So I've got a bit of a perspective on platforms. So why do people use platforms? Well, there's a whole bunch of reasons why people use it. So simplicity, speed, consistency, effectiveness, consolidation, analysis. These are all the kind of things that people spin out when they talk about it. Or you might put it another way. You might say, kind of impresses clients, it's easy to use, and it's time efficient. And you know, from a user perspective, essentially what's going on is you're making everything as easy as possible. So you can get more done, and you minimize resource. And just to repeat the bit before, there's a really cool interface that makes it look like you're doing stuff. So you can point to the client or your boss or whoever and say, look at these charts. But I think this misses a fundamental kind of opportunity and component. So I just kind of asked the question, you know, what do we think is going to win in a race? Obviously, the McLaren sports car is going to win in a race. But you know, people might say, but the interface on this is amazing. It's like really simple to drive. You know, anyone can get in this and drive it, and it's also incredibly efficient. It's like 2 pence a mile to drive one of these things. You know, why would you not want this? It's simple, it's efficient, and of course, the missing dimension is performance. And you might ask the same question again of these two things, which is, which one innovates the most? And it's a bit of a kind of blokey subject area, but these guys will bring 10 innovations to the car each race that they run. You know, and so they're just in a state of constant innovation, and that's one of the issues that I have with platforms. So platforms have this thing called lag, and they're always playing catch up. They're always stuck in big release cycles. And they're typically designed for the lowest common denominator. And you sometimes have lock-ins, you have contractual lock-ins. So the people that are using Kenshu, are any of you using Kenshu to power Google's new shopping format? I know the answer, you're not, because it doesn't support it. So it's a kind of example of a feature that comes out that you can't take advantage of because you're stuck on this platform, you're driving around in this mobility scooter. But in a way, that's actually not the biggest issue. The biggest issue with the platform is around the new opportunities that are arising. So this is a really old chart. So this is from Oracle 2012. And what this says is that marketing data is growing at a rate of 40% a year compound. Now, I think this is massively out of date. I would love someone to get me an up-to-date thing. But the point is that the opportunities to use data are exploding, and if you're locked in a platform which is really designed to, you know, minimize the development time and sell the most number of subscriptions, you're not going to have an opportunity to compete here. And if you go back to my example, my ticket example, taking a product feed and pushing it through eBay's API, you know, there's no platforms out there that will do that. And so if you can't do that, you can't really exploit data. So my hypothesis around platforms is that they dumb you down and they actually constrain you. So in terms of building a data-centric organization, that's my first point. The second point is around people. So if you don't have a fancy platform to do stuff, how exactly do you solve problems? Well, here's the kind of second principle that I want to introduce, and that's the concept that easy isn't good. I think when you think of consumer devices, we're educated to think that easy is good, and I would argue it is. But if you're talking about an organization, I don't know that easy is good. So again, I'm going to pick on Kenshu. This is Kenshu's interface. It looks really cool, doesn't it? It's got a map of the world in different colors. And this is an SQL query. Doesn't look so cool. But my contention is that this kind of attitude of, you know, press the button, made easy, what you're really doing is dumbing down everything that you do. And what you're not doing is kind of unlocking the brain power of people in your organizations. So that's the approach that we take when it comes to people, is we put a lot of emphasis on training of people. So everybody in Forward 3D has to understand all the digital channels, but they also have to be able to do three other things. They have to be able to query data, so they can use a language like SQL. They have to be able to script actions, so they don't have to do the same thing over and over again. They can script it, so they can use stuff like Ruby. And they have to be able to model, so they might use a program like R or many others. But that's the point, is platforms are expensive and training is expensive, but we go down the training route. Now, it's not the only investment that we make, so there is infrastructure that we have to put in place, but the infrastructure that we put in place is mainly around database stuff. So does anybody here use Hive? Okay, there you go. So Hive, Hadoop, big data, all these kind of buzzwords. You know, this is what Facebook collected and processed their data using, and we've been using this for about 5 years. That's our biggest piece of investment. Are the resources around stuff like this. And then the other investment that we make is we build lots of APIs so we can take data. And we can take any data. So if you ask me to overlay Net-a-Porter with meteorological data, we can pull that data and we can look at when raincoats will spike, in theory. But that's an example of the kind of discovery that you can do. And then if you do that, then all of the analysts in Forward 3D can write scripts. So they can query that data. So that's our platform. You know, it doesn't have a cool front end. That's our platform. But if you think about the way that data is exploding, that's really the only thing that will ever survive, because everything else will be out of date. The last thing I want to talk about is the culture. And this is a bit of a weird one within an agency environment. It might be easier within a client-side environment. But this is my one 1980s reference. Anybody know who this is? Zamo. Zamo, that's right. So Zamo had quite a crippling heroin addiction, but he overcame it with this badge. So the whole thing was just say no. And I think there was a top 10 single, just say no. But this is a bit of a mantra within Forward 3D, is just say no. And it's about saying no to stuff that's interesting. And the whole hypothesis, the reason why I worked with that cool affiliate company was because they did a query that related to actionable marketing stuff. That's what they did. They didn't do interesting. Interesting is just a big old waste of time. If there isn't a marketing action associated with that data, don't do it. And this is the brother of interesting. It would be cool if. You know, and normally someone senior in the organization says, it'd be really cool if we could, you know. And our whole hypothesis is, no, it wouldn't be cool. It wouldn't be cool at all. It'd be a massive waste of time. What you really need to do is make sure that data informs absolutely everything you do every single day. Because there's enough crap to do in your job without doing irrelevant stuff. And it might mean that you have to say goodbye to things like this. Now, as an agency, we don't sign statements of work, which is kind of weird, because you might think, well, how the hell do you make money? But also clients like this, because clients feel that they know what they're getting, because there's a statement of work. It's written down, you know what you're going to get. But there's a fundamental problem with the statement of work, which is it's written before you get the data. So how would you know if this was appropriate? So we say goodbye to statements of work, but the converse of that is we have to do daily reprioritization. So every time we get a piece of data in, we will potentially change our mind. And one of our mantras is that change is good. Changing your mind is good. If you do something different at the end of the week to what you thought you were going to be doing on Monday, that's actually a good thing. It's not a bad thing. And just to kind of close this off, my feeling is that you can't be data-centric if you ignore what the data is telling you. And it's amazing how many organizations still do that. So to wrap up, I think there are 3 things that you should do if you want to build a data-centric agency or indeed client. You need to drop your platform addiction. You need to skill up your people, and you need to learn to say no, unless, of course, the data says yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martin. Well, that was fantastic. The really inspiring stuff. I wasn't sure when you said you went clean and joined an affiliate. I have to say that was struggling somewhat. Yeah, well, it became an agency. It was an affiliate, right? But I was going to say, but that said, that was an absolutely fantastic presentation with brilliant sound bites. So data informs everything every day, I think, is a great thing, and the whole idea of the data arriving after the statement of works is just a ridiculous place to start. Easy isn't good. The new opportunity, win through data, not platforms. So brilliant. Thank you very much for that. And you're taking part in the panel session later on, so there'll be a chance to ask Martin some questions then. Next up, we have Charlotte. Charlotte is from the Charlotte Morton, industry head creative agency team Google. She is a founding member of that team. I was out in South by Southwest with Charlotte, where she was wearing a Lycra outfit why? It's exactly what people want to hear. Introducing someone called DJ Barbecue, which was it was actually a great event and very inspiring. Now that I've embarrassed her, Charlotte is a founding member of Google's UK creative agency relationships team, the first team of its kind to be established at Google. Her mission is simple: to help ad agencies make the most of the web. Charlotte, please come up to the stage. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nigel. So yeah, Lycra was worn in South by Southwest. There was a very valid business reason for that. And also I knew Zamo. So I'm very, very proud that I loved Grange a lot when I was allowed to watch it by my mother. So first of all, this is a lesson learned on not letting your team brainstorm the title for your presentation. Because I suspect a few of you might have thought, is she going to do some mime? Is it going to be a really weird, awkward energizer from Google? It is not. It is my very heavy-handed way of trying to bring together two worlds. So I suppose in my world, working with creative agencies here in the UK with Google, often the world of performance and data seems very far removed from what we talk about, and maybe even the type of agencies that we deal with. But I really, really want to take this opportunity to come to an event like this to try and actually think about how we bring those worlds back together. So my first confession is that I was basically born in a test tube here at Google. I've been here for 10 years. And it gives you quite an amazing perspective. And creativity and data are two things that sit in this company together in quite a fascinating way. Creativity, obviously, I mean, you have to be a pretty creative company if you're going to try and solve kind of the mission statement that we put out there to organize the world's information. You need some pretty creative problem solvers to tackle that. But as we've actually brought on different kind of platforms and acquisitions into Google, creativity has started to gather a bit more kind of momentum in a way, especially when you look at a very creative platform like YouTube. I was actually hired. I've actually got a bone to pick with our HR department. I've got this on tape now as well. So I was actually brought into Google, and the job description that I found, I was one of the few people at Google who was not referred, was actually copywriter. And I was like, brilliant. I'd wanted to kind of get into advertising. I thought, copywriter at Google, this sounds like the best job in the world. Don't know what that is. Have no idea how Google makes money as the tender age of 23 as I was. And then realised that actually I was going to be building keywords, a lot of keyword lists. And actually I was going to be working in Excel spreadsheets. And actually attached to all these words, there were going to be loads and loads of numbers and bits of data and percentages and click-through rates. And actually that was real shock to my system coming back from an arts degree. So I've always had quite an interesting kind of interest in what does kind of data and creativity mean for me personally, thinking I would obviously go into some kind of artsy career, then coming into an organization like Google that was really data driven. So I suppose for the next kind of 15 minutes, I'd like to explore a little bit around what creativity and data and performance mean together, because I think there's certainly a perception that never the twain shall meet. I actually then happened upon this very interesting study which looked at a correlation between creativity and effectiveness, actually. So this was a study that was kind of brought two kind of uber studies together, which is the IPA Effectiveness Awards and the Gun Report. So the Gun Report is a collation of the most creatively awarded campaigns. So ones that have won real amazing kind of creative kudos. And what they did is they overlaid that with the results from the IPA Effectiveness Awards to see if there was any kind of relationship between the two. And what a surprise, probably not a surprise, they found that there most definitely was, and that actually creativity drives effectiveness. So creativity in its broadest sense, and this is what great advertising does and great ad agencies do, is creates difference. It creates that moment where you go, that's what that brand stands for. And then difference goes on to kind of create value for businesses where you choose them over someone else. So actually it is proven that the world of kind of creativity plus performance or data or effectiveness or whatever you want to lump those words together in are actually intrinsically linked. And we should know that. And I think it's important that we recognize that these two cultures and these two worlds actually sit together. So I was even more kind of interested in this when I was lucky enough to spend a couple of days last year. We run a program called Squared, which maybe some of your agencies and some of your employees have been on. It's a kind of our big digital immersion for new talent into the industry. We run something called Squared Executive, where we take boards of agencies and do a kind of a digital immersion around big problems or big challenges that they're trying to get their heads around. It might be data, it might be collaboration, it might be planning frameworks. And I was very lucky to spend 2 days with BBH's, probably one of the most creatively awarded agencies in the UK. And they were actually trying to crack, and they've spoken about this kind of phrase publicly. They were trying to crack, what does high performance creativity mean? And Ben Fennell, their CEO, said early in the year in campaign, we're increasingly using the phrase high performance creativity. It's the marriage of relevance and difference, two forces that should never be separated. And in our kind of world, I suppose when we think relevance, we think data, we think personalizing things, making things spot on at the right time, at the right moment for a user or consumer. And difference is what creativity can do, creating that difference and that value. And their argument, very logically, is that those things shouldn't sit apart from each other. Those things should really, really work well together. And it was interesting what they were talking about in terms of their vision for their agency. And that's why it's interesting hearing about agency cultures from Martin as well, is that they're talking about having sales data, you know, screens within teams so that creative ideas can be stimulated by data that is pouring in, and therefore creatives and planners can be much more responsive and much more agile in the way that they try and answer clients' challenges. So I thought that was really interesting, and it's interesting that the word performance is becoming much more regular in the kind of the lexicon of creative agencies. And I think trying to get away from that, this is the soft world, the world of emotion, the world of storytelling. Actually, it's got to be storytelling with real purpose. Also, the interesting thing, I think, is the difference between thinking about effectiveness, which tends to be slightly backward-looking, and performance, which is actually very, very, very forward-looking. So yeah, this theme has I think come to the fore for me personally recently. So I am going to talk, I have cards on the table, because I know this is incredibly, there's no sales pitch here, don't worry, I've been very, very tightly briefed on this, but because I work with creative agencies, the one platform that we do work on a lot is YouTube, and I'm not going to talk to you about campaigns or anything like that particularly, but it's an interesting platform from that kind of data plus creativity angle, because it does exactly that, and the most successful people on YouTube are the ones that understand storytelling but also understand data, and that's kind of what I want to talk to you a little bit about. So we know that the web has democratized creativity, and this is what's so wonderful about the age in which we live. Let's just play this fantastic video just to get everyone awake. Can we roll this, please? With some sound if possible. Oh?
Right to your door. Yeah, $1. Are the blades any good? No. Our blades are great. Each razor has stainless steel blades, an aloe vera lubricating strip, and a pivot head. It's so gentle a toddler can use it. And do you like spending $20 a month on brand name razors? 19 go to Roger Federer. I'm good at tennis.
And do you think your razor needs a vibrating handle, a flashlight, a back scratcher, and 10 blades? Your handsome-ass grandfather had 1 blade and polio. Looking good, Papa! Stop paying for shave tape you don't need. And stop forgetting to buy your blades every month. Alejandro and I are going to ship them right to you. We're not just selling razors, we're also making new jobs. Alejandro, what were you doing last month?
Not working.
What are you doing now?
Working.
I'm no Vanderbilt, but this train makes hay. So stop forgetting to buy your blades every month and start deciding where you're going to stack all those dollar bills I'm saving you. We are DollarShaveClub.com, and the party is on.
Thanks. So I mean, it's, I'm sure, have most of you seen the Dollar Shave Club stuff? Yes, some nods, not all nods. But what's really interesting about this and what kind of the web has done to creativity is that everyone can take advantage of the value that it creates. So Dollar Shave Club, a startup business that had the insight that all these fancy razors, actually some people just want really, really simple razor blades. We're going to get that to people's door through a subscription service. But how would you advertise that 20 years ago? What would you have done? Who would you have gone to? What agency would even have taken you seriously? The fact that these guys could make a video for $17,000, I think, or something along those lines, get it on YouTube and get this huge momentum and awareness for their business is really, really exciting. And then that creativity, that difference they're creating goes on to deliver value back to their business. So I guess my argument to you is that I think creativity is even more critical in today's world. If our world looks more and more like this, and looking at some of the vocabulary that came up in the previous presentation, the fact we're so empowered with this deluge of data and how we manage it. And user journeys are even more sensitive and complicated and intertwined, that actually creativity, kind of creating that cut through, is actually more and more important. And I would say that it's really important to remember those water cooler moments, actually, for brands and for our clients, and what creates that difference and that value for them. And you know, you might not stand next to a water cooler and go, God, you know, I saw that search ad yesterday and it was so well targeted, it really made me cry. But you might say, oh my God, did you see the Dollar Shave thing? It made me laugh so much. What an amazing business. Or you might say, I saw Evian babies. What a bizarre way to talk about water. Or you might say all range of things about wonderful creative ideas that you've seen. So I'd argue that we need, again, to bring the two things really close together. So what does all this mean in our world, and how do we talk to our clients, I suppose, about data and creativity? What does all this mean for modern creativity? So the first thing about data, which is great in a creative world, is it can help you have better ideas. And again, we totally want to get rid of this perception that the two don't sit together. This was a report that was done on the beauty space on YouTube by a company called Pixability. And it's just such powerful stuff to show to agencies and to show to clients, because it creates opportunity, great creative scope. So first of all, on YouTube, there are about 15 billion views around videos that mention anything to do with beauty. So that's one big audience. Down here, you've got all the videos that actually just mention a beauty brand, not owned by a beauty brand, but they just mention a beauty brand. And that's a much smaller bubble. And right down at the bottom, any brand that actually owns any of those conversations, and that's about 500 million views. So what you can actually say is, via data, you're helping to scope out great creative territory, a great insight, a great place to start. Because ultimately on YouTube, it's all these amazing vloggers from their bedrooms who own those conversations. And actually, if advertising is a share of voice game, then that is obviously a big opportunity. I want to show you a little case study here about one brand who's really taken advantage of data in a creative way to build a really interesting connection with their consumers. Can we play this video?
Our idea? Bringing together the biggest search engine, the biggest hair brands, and the world's best YouTubers to banish bad hair days for good. All Things Hair constantly monitors hair searches to see what women are looking for. This is passed to bloggers who, every day, use these searches to create inspiring, brilliant answers, using Unilever hair brands.
Hello everyone, today I'm going to show you how to recreate this amazing fishtail braid.
There they can browse by hair type, find all the latest hair trends, treatments and how-tos, along with the Unilever products to make it happen.
And then for a little bit more extra condition, I've used this Dove Hair Therapy South London hair mask.
Making it the glossy go-to guide for great hair, and just what women were waiting for.
I can stop it there. So you've got a brand there who's kind of acknowledged, I think, all of the data that is spilling out of YouTube around what people are actually doing and where they're doing it, and built something that is so directly connected into what people are looking for. So that's Tresemme doing something quite interesting. Obviously, data also gives you amazing feedback, and this is just, it's an amazing stat. I'm not, have any of you seen the epic split from Volvo Trucks, the Jean-Claude Van Damme stuff? So most people are nodding. So I won't play the video because it's very, very well known indeed. But imagine having this kind of stuff plugged into your creative team as an agency, that you can see a lot of advertising aims to make cultural impact and popular impact in mainstream culture, as opposed to just within Adland and our industry. And I don't think you can get anything more compelling that Volvo Trucks at one point last year was more searched for than Great Sex. And this is not even just Volvo, this is Volvo Trucks. Now that is quite incredible difference that is driven through creativity. But I think the most interesting point, actually, when you look at YouTube and just thinking about what drives the platform itself, which is the people. So obviously you can say that about a lot of social platforms, that it's the community and it's the people that drive it forward. I mean, on YouTube, it really is, only because these guys are the people who are making the content and giving the platform what it is. But they are storytellers, but also they're really connected to their data and the data that their channels actually spit out. So you've got some of these very native YouTubers here, Jack Scat, who are just vloggers, the slow-mo guys who literally film stuff in slow motion, Vice, who are a publisher who do fantastic journalism and documentary and video content on their channel. All really high performing channels, all with lots of views and all with lots of subscribers. You get people like Jamie Oliver, who is committed to the channel and the platform in quite a major way. But what you see from the people who succeed on YouTube are the ones who actually can combine that creative storytelling with data. So it's a platform that really embraces art and science. So over here you have the kind of the fundamentals which we would talk about to creative agencies, which is remember to make your content really discoverable, accessible, it's shareable, have an authentic voice, make it emotional. But actually, if you're not doing any of this stuff here, then you're not going to win on the platform. And this is all data-led stuff. So are your tags right? Are your descriptions right? Are you thinking about the recency of your content, the frequency of your uploading? What are your engagement metrics like? What's your view-through rate like? What are your counts? What do your thumbnails look like? What's your watch time? All these questions which actually brand storytellers these days also need to become au fait with in order to make this stuff work. I'm going to end up playing you a silly video because ultimately that's what I'm here for. So can we just play this video here?
Hey.
Hey.
How's it going?
Good, you?
Good. What do you want to do for dinner?
No, you can't talk to her right now.
What?
You can't talk to her right now because I'm talking to her right now.
Okay, well, that's my wife. And I can talk to my wife whenever I want to talk to my wife. She can talk to me whenever she wants to talk to me?
No, she's not your wife. She's the princess.
I'm the princess right now.
See?
Well,
okay. So she's playing with me. So you just go over there right now. Look how much fun we're having.
Thanks very much. You can cut that. Some knowing smirks from people with children, definitely. I really like this as a final video because I think it shows what YouTube is all about in a way, which is this element of storytelling but with a performance mindset. These guys here, I mean, what a random idea to suddenly make a channel out of. Actual conversations with my 2-year-old, but he's made streams and streams of content about this. I think 700,000 subscribers he's brought onto that channel over a year. A guy recording conversations with his 2-year-old. But it's interesting what he's doing kind of on the direct response side of things. You can go and get merchandise. He's asking you to subscribe. Here you can go and watch seasons 1 and 2. So what I would leave you with is thinking about this very creative platform with a hard data-driven performance mindset in order to be successful. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. You should have told me you were bigging up the IPA before you. I would have saved the Lycra story for another occasion. So just to be clear, the IPA Effectiveness Awards that were referenced in relation to the GUM report, they don't look at any form of creativity, only performance, well, only effectiveness actually. So that's why there's a really interesting connection between the GUM report, which looks simply at creativity. But above and beyond that, I thought it was fascinating. So storytelling with a purpose, what a great concept. For moving forward and from the shift from effectiveness, which is looking backwards, to performance, moving forwards, combining art and science. Fascinating, very entertaining presentation. Next up we have Andy Mylap, He's definitely going to be a subscriber to All Things Hair, as I'm sure you'll agree when you meet him. And he is currently employed as Google Industry Head for the UK insurance vertical, supporting customers on digital strategy, technology, data, and the adoption of Google products and technology. Andy, over to you.
Thanks, Nigel. Cool. Great presentations, obviously, from Martin and Charlotte. I particularly like the Tresemme example, so I'm going to be on YouTube later looking at some products. So yeah, thank you, Nigel, for the introduction. I'm Andy Mylop. As Nigel said, I'm industry head for the insurance vertical. And I really want to talk to you today about what I believe it means to become data-led and customer-centric. My role at Google is very much in helping direct insurance and price comparison customers really embrace digital transformation. And I think this means actually investing very much in kind of data and technology, really to put the customer at the heart of the business. And that's about moving to really kind of effective and efficient customer lifecycle management. So moving from acquisition to retention to cross-sell, really to drive business growth and also brand advocacy. So prior to joining Google, I was actually head of programmatic media at Mediacom. So I've worked on the agency side. That's actually my background. And I was also head of digital at Money Supermarket. And my time at Money Supermarket was really leading a very ambitious digital transformation program, which was really centered on redefining the business around data and technology. So what I really wanted to do, using some of my experience, is give you more of a kind of industry insight, I think, on some of the challenges and opportunities for brands really becoming data-led and customer-centric. So I wanted to try and answer three questions. Why do we need to become data-centric and customer-led? Probably fairly obvious, but I think it's interesting to look at some statistics. Secondly, really interesting, Martin's talked about what a data-driven agency looks like. I'd like to think, from a brand perspective, what does a data-centric brand or organization look like? And then finally, how can Google help? And again, it's not a sales pitch for Google products. What I really wanted to do is explain, how Google's looking at this area around big data and how we can help brands manage that big data challenge and then activate that data through platforms. So fairly obvious, that we all know the customer journey is becoming and has become multi-channel and multi-screen. The reality is that consumers have actually adopted mobile devices and multi-screen behavior very, very quickly. And what we're seeing, for most verticals, the customer experience really now is digital. What we're seeing in terms of search queries broadly is that they're growing on smartphones, they're growing on tablets, and they're declining on desktop. So to give you a view for the insurance category, typically we're seeing growth rates on tablets in excess of 200%, on mobile or smartphone about 150%. And I think what's interesting here is that consumers have adopted technology and devices very quickly, but the challenge is actually with organizations in terms of catching up, because it really means a couple of things. So firstly, the brand needs to have mobile optimized platforms. Typically, that could be responsive design, dynamic serving, or separate sites. It also means that we need to be able to track and attribute across not just channels, but also increasingly devices as well. That means moving into areas like deterministic attribution, statistical identification, in order to do that. And I think the most important thing is just thinking about how do we store, how do we unify, and then how do we activate all of the data and the audience signals that are being generated. So every time somebody's on a mobile device, they're generating an audience signal which can help us understand something about that customer. And I'm sure you've seen slides like this before, but the reality is, whether you like the term big data or not, I'll use it for this presentation. It's set to grow exponentially, and obviously, I think Martin touched on that slide in his presentation. So 191 billion emails sent every day, online ad spend growing, 109 billion this year. On Facebook, just in one day, 500 terabytes of data updated daily, and the reality is, this really is just the beginning. So I thought this was interesting. Again, I think Nigel had the head-up display that Facebook have recently purchased, I think, for $2 billion. But it's interesting because we are starting to see the rise of wearable technology. This was research from Cisco that was released in February. And I think what's interesting is by 2018, there'll be 177 million global wearable devices, and that's rising from 22 million currently. And that's very much this idea of the kind of rise of the quantified self. So, we're seeing Fitbit, Nike, lots of other Fuel Band, lots of other devices, that are being worn by people really to monitor kind of health and wellness. And again, all of these devices are generating data which is telling us something about the customer. I don't know if many of you have seen this, but actually a couple of weeks ago, it's almost like wearables are going mainstream. So Amazon actually launched their dedicated website. And this, I think, really indicates it's a category that's gaining visibility. You may have read that Google Glass recently had a one-day kind of flash sale in the US. That's actually the next phase in the kind of Explorer program in terms of bringing glass to market. As Nigel talked about earlier, the virtual kind of Rift goggles, a company called Oculus that was actually acquired by Facebook for $2 billion very recently. So I think as this adoption continues, it's really thinking about what's the opportunity for my organization to actually leverage this data. The other thing to think about is the connected car. So again, we're seeing Android embedded into vehicles in the US. That generates a lot of data, particularly interesting for insurance companies, because there's likely to be a lot of disruption caused by essentially the data that's being generated and how that can be leveraged. So thinking about just the impact on the organization, big data or data absolutely is fundamentally going to change the way that organizations operate in the future. And I think the good thing is that the chief marketing officer now is realizing that actually data absolutely is the key to becoming customer centric. And it's not just being able to capture data, it's being able to mine it for the insights, and it's being able to activate it at scale. And really, for a brand, it's about being able to deliver this personalized customer experience across media, across platforms. And that's all about growing business, but it's also about customer retention and customer loyalty. But I think the challenge is that the traditional organizational structure that we see within most companies just isn't currently configured to really address this challenge. And I think it also absolutely changes the role of the chief marketing officer within the organization. So it's interesting because I think traditionally the CMO, as you would expect, would own brand communication and marketing strategy. In most of our organizations, CMOs are responsible for very large offline marketing budgets, traditionally offline TV, and these are traditional marketing skills. You'd expect every CMO to have these skills, but the question I guess that I'm posing is, in the future, the CMO is going to have a very different role. So they're going to be responsible for data, for analytics, for advertising technology. And previously, this was really the domain of the CIO, the CTO, or even the CDO, the Chief Data Officer. And what we're starting to see really is the emergence of new interesting roles. So a couple of them you may have heard of. The Chief Marketing Technology Officer is one. Chief Digital Officer is one that is more widely used, and even the Chief Customer Officer. But I think this is encouraging because at the end of the day, what we're seeing is that organizations are really starting to think about how this role is evolving. It is a challenge to IT departments, I think, who have kind of typically not always conversant, particularly with ad technology and ad platforms. So again, you may have seen this slide previously. You may have seen this figure. Gartner predict that by 2017, the Chief Marketing Officer will spend more on technology than the CIO. And when we think about cloud computing, the market opportunity already is 22 billion. That's set to scale rapidly. And what we're also seeing is CMOs increasingly thinking about advertising technology and investing in technology themselves. So that could be everything from web analytics to ad servers, to data management platforms, to demand-side platforms. And I think, as I referenced earlier, it's really starting to blur the line between IT and marketing, which is something that needs to be considered. I think it's also a challenging progression for a CMO that potentially comes from a traditional marketing background. And another view, I think, on Martin's slide earlier, this was actually the digital transit map. Apologies, it's quite difficult to read, but it was released last year in June by Gartner, and I think what it shows is that this ad landscape is extremely complex, it's fragmented, and it's actually very confusing. And I think the other thing that's interesting is that a recent study by Forrester in the US actually showed that 67% of marketers are unaware of automated buying technology. They don't understand it, or they acknowledge they actually need to learn more about it. And that's interesting. We're starting to see more consolidation in large media and tech organizations, Google being one of them, Adobe being another one. You may have seen that Google actually announced the acquisition of Odometry, a pure play attribution management company last week. And we're also seeing a multitude of kind of specialist tech companies and startups. So the big question, I think, for marketers and particularly CMOs in the future is, do we build an interoperable technology stack where we're kind of plugging best of breed together, or do we think about one single solution, which could be a Google, a Adobe, or a Salesforce? So I particularly like this quote, if you like, or this definition from John Nardone at X+1, which is an ad technology platform. And I think the key here is that we need to think about technology and data, because technology and data are what is actually driving the rise in programmatic marketing. And the reality is the core premise of programmatic is really the ability to kind of deliver these very targeted, relevant advertising and personalized experiences across platforms and across devices. And that's really based on the data that you capture and what you're able to really understand about that customer. Equally, it could be all of the audience signals that are generated when people are on devices that can be captured. You derive insight from those touch points and then activate them through marketing platforms. Again, just to give you a couple of data points around the rise of programmatic marketing. Magna Global released the International State of Programmatic in April, and they're predicting a compound annual growth rate of 31% through 2017. I think to give it a little bit more perspective, the UK programmatic market is going to be worth 3.2 billion by 2017, and that's rising from 1.2 billion last year. So exponential growth, and I think the key message in here, it's about data, it's about insight, it's about being able to leverage that really with programmatic marketing and the premise that offers in terms of getting closer to the customer. So I think the other thing to think about is just how other media channels are becoming increasingly programmatic. Today we see most of that in display, mainly in retargeting and prospecting, but actually we're starting to see a big shift to video and mobile and addressable TV. So a lot of acquisitions in the space. AOL acquired Adapt TV, 400 million last August. Comcast agreed to buy Freewheel recently. We're seeing Sky launching their AdSmart product, and we're likely to see programmatic move into other areas, radio, out of home, etc. So really, I think what we need to think about is the way that brands buy media in the future is fundamentally shifting. And I think, data and process are very much the new black. So as I say, the old method of buying media is rapidly changing. It's shifting to audience-based buying. And really, in order to capitalize on that, brands have to think about not just leveraging the data, but also having the process to be able to derive the insight and then action it through platforms. And I think a lot of talk about data management platforms being a core part of that. The reality is that when you try and do this, actually it's quite challenging, because typically you have disparate databases, you have siloed organization structures, there's no strategic partnership often between IT and marketing, and it's really thinking about how this impacts the traditional organizational structure. And I think the reality is, if you work in a client organisation, there are silos. The silos exist today and have done. Marketing traditionally owns the customer, and I think, referring to the famous quote from Peter Drucker, business only has two functions: marketing and innovation. But the reality is, often, organisations actually are led by finance. I'm not saying marketing operate on the periphery, but often businesses are commercially and finance led, and that can create a challenge. I think the other thing, technology and data is typically owned by IT, but the customer analysis and insight is owned by marketing, and equally the media planning and activation is also owned by marketing. So I guess the question is, in a world where technology and data are going to lead and marketing is real time, this structure no longer works. So I wanted to just think about a different approach, because this is very much around the data-centric organisation, and I think part of it is really thinking about how you're going to become data-led and customer-centric in the future. So I think the first thing is, brand absolutely has to become obsessive about the customer and creating customer value, and each part of the organisation has to focus on the customer. So thinking about finance, finance need to have customer-centric measurement. So maybe that's a lifetime value or an average revenue per user, for example. IT need to be able to store and structure data, in reality using cloud computing. Marketing needs to derive insight from the data and then really build kind of propensity or predictive models, a little bit of what Martin talked about again earlier, and then activate those models increasingly in a programmatic way through media. And equally, brands need to ensure that really the customer experience is absolutely consistent, timely and relevant across channels and devices. And I think, in order to do this, it is absolutely about breaking down the traditional silos, and it really requires a different approach. So perhaps thinking about cross-functional teams that can work together in a much more integrated and kind of fluid way. And I think, also in the future, it's thinking about how you work with partners. So how you work with management consultants, how you work with your media agencies, how you work with creative agencies, because when you think about process and you think about cross-functional teams, they all have to work together. So I just wanted to think, or reflect for a moment on, what are the skills that are required in a cross-functional team, and, how do these need to evolve? And part of it is just looking at marketing, IT, finance, data science, marketing. And I think, we can see that marketing absolutely is moving from media planning to data and audience planning. And that's very much about, marketing or the agency being really able to select all of the data sources and additional macro data. IT needs to be able to store it and then integrate it and structure it. And then marketing really need to be able to kind of activate this data increasingly through programmatic media. I think all of that absolutely needs to be supported by integrated business process, technology, and task flows. So just thinking about a different approach, how could you structure cross-functional teams? So one idea is just to think about structuring around the customer life cycle. So each cross-functional team focuses on a different area. So one could be acquisition, retention, cross-sell. And each team is focused very much on the appropriate data sources, on the models and the media mix, really designed to kind of drive the customer or consumer value and really maximize the revenue opportunity. And obviously that can be supported by finance with the appropriate measurement and attribution methodology. Second idea, again, in terms of a cross-functional team is thinking around audience segments, so in-market prospects, maybe high lifetime value segments, and maybe propensity-based models, where you've got a particular segment that has propensity perhaps to buy a second product, for example. I think, an integrated technology stack increasingly makes these approaches possible. I think, the key is having one view of the customer, one view of the consumer that allows these segments to be easily created, overlap removed, and then really activated with consistent and relevant messaging. And the reality is, in a traditional siloed structure, that's very, very difficult to do. So I just wanted to end, just really touch on what Google's I guess, focus is in terms of delivering this data-led and customer-centric solution. So for the past 15 years, Google have been building out essentially a very, very powerful, high-quality cloud infrastructure. And the idea really is that we can bring all of this big data, so whether it's audience signals that are generated from online campaigns, whether it's your CRM data, whether it's macro-level data. So the example, weather, how does weather impact, for example, breakdown cover, or when someone's going to be in market for a convertible car? How do you get all of this data essentially into one place? Second stage is just really thinking about big data analytics. So once the data is kind of structured and stored, the next stage is really how do we essentially analyze big data sets? How do we reduce it? How do we derive insight from it? And the analytics solution that Google have, which is called BigQuery, is very much about facilitating the processing of that data and then predictive analytics and modeling that can be leveraged. And then finally, it's just connecting this into essentially the DoubleClick stack, which many of you will, I'm sure, be aware of. So the idea is that essentially we can build these predictive models, and then they can be executed in two ways. They can be executed in executed in an automated way, directly through the bid stream, for example, on our DSP, so DoubleClick Bid Manager. Equally, it could be a model that's activated by essentially through a trading strategy, through an agency team, or through an in-house team. And in the future, what we're going to have is basically a kind of central audience visualization and segmentation view that will allow audience segments to essentially be selected and then activated pretty much in real time across the platforms. So I guess the only other thing is, yes, you need to have a view in terms of big data and thinking about strategy. The other thing is, it's very, very possible to kind of activate audience data today and really to deliver a proof of concept project. So I don't know how many of you use Google Analytics Premium, for example, but GAP, you may not know, it's very easy actually to bring all of your first-party data into Google Analytics Premium. It's also very easy to create lots of audience segments based on engagement on your website, and those segments can be immediately activated through DoubleClick Bid Manager, for example. So again, this is not a sell for Google products, it's just a use case to give you an idea. You don't need to wait essentially to have cloud-based computing in place. Yes, you need to have a strategy, but it's what can you kind of do today. And I think, very quick case study, we did this for a big advertiser very recently. Unsurprisingly, kind of 71% of the conversions have come from those segments. And what we've been able to see is, substantial increase in conversions, lower costs. So it's all about leveraging those audience segments, understanding, through their behavior, where they are in terms of their journey, and then being able to connect them to very relevant messaging in real time to drive performance. So my final slide, and I just wanted to finish on what I kind of see as the digital advantage. So I think being data-led and customer-centric should be the focus of every single organization, that it's really focused on achieving digital maturity. And this is interesting, it was a Capgemini and MIT findings from a 2-year study of over 400 global enterprises. And actually what they found is that the digitally mature businesses massively kind of outperform their competitors across every geography and every industry. So digitally mature businesses, higher revenue, plus 9%, higher profits, 26%, and also significantly higher returns for investors. So, if you're having this conversation with a CEO, stakeholder value is something that is extremely important. And I think, my final thought to kind of leave you with is really harnessing the power of data and technology, embracing programmatic marketing, and structuring your organization around the customer really are the kind of prerequisites to achieving this digital maturity, and obviously the benefits in kind of business growth and market leadership that will bring. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andy. So some of my takeaways from that. So we're living in a multi-channel, multi-screen reality. It's not just about capturing data, but using it. The blurring of lines between marketing and IT, driving the need for cross-functional teams. And my favorite soundbite at the moment, quantified self, but we'll talk about that another time. So now we're going to have a short break, 10 or 15 minutes. I think we'll get back together at 11, 5 to 11, 11? Thumbs up for 11. So we'll regroup at 11. Please help yourself to refreshments on either side and take the opportunity for a comfort break. See you back here shortly. Thank you very much. Hi everyone. Can we start returning to our seats, please, guys? If you wouldn't mind just coming back, we're going to crack on in about another 30 seconds or so. So just while we're waiting for the last few people to take their seats back, just a little reminder, of course, hashtag future of data, our hashtag for the day, which is on these slides, but not on the other slides, which I thought they were, which is why I haven't been mentioning it so much. So I'm now going to, in true salesman fashion, mention it 3 times in quick succession. So hashtag future of data. Pretty much all getting settled back. Thank you very much. Welcome back. Welcome back to everyone live streaming via Google Plus Hangout. I hope you enjoyed your own coffees that you made presumably with your own kettles and things. So again, the hashtag is future of data. And without further ado, I think we'll crack on with the second half of our event. So next up, I'm very pleased to introduce Anita Garimella-Andrews, and she is VP Client Analytics Services at RJ Metrics, and she's going to be talking to us about big data, how it's new and how it's hot. Anita, over to you. Thanks very much.
Good morning. I am going to apologize right from the get-go. I'm fighting a cold after flying over here and with my 2-year-old daughter for the first time on an airplane who refused to sleep. So all of that's coming together right now. So please excuse me. Just to give a little brief bio. So RJ Metrics is cloud-based business analytics intelligence software. We were certainly on that grid that was presented earlier. Our customers are typically e-commerce, subscription-based SaaS companies in the U.S. and also throughout the world. So my own experience, I've been there for about 8 months. Before that, I had founded an analytics and optimization services company whose customers included Zynga to Dollar Shave Club to many others. And we were tool agnostic and really trying to figure out how do we take data and solve typically marketing problems. But here's the trick. How do you do it under an SOW, because we did use SOWs quite a bit. We hadn't cracked the nut of not using them. But also within very, very short time frames, right? The patience of our customers was quite usually short, particularly in the startup and sort of growth phase side of things. So my talk, I think, is going to be a great jumping off point for yours. So this is kind of fun. That's RJ Metrics. How many of you are familiar with RJ Metrics? Not too many. Okay, good. Okay. So my perspective, coming into this, at RJ Metrics, I run the Client Analytics Services team, which is a services part of RJ Metrics. Because, to your point, you cannot do analytics without the humans, right? The idea of doing this just with tools is, I think, a fallacy. So. But it's not about big data. It's not about big data. I'm kind of sick of that term of big data. It's not about getting more data. What I'd like to challenge you to do is think about taking the data that you have and analyzing it differently, right? Because the more data that you add to your sort of stack of data, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get any more insights. Truly, if all of us could double our revenue with one extra column of data, we would do that in a second, right? Who cares about having more sources? The trick is finding that one column of data that would double your revenue, and that's kind of, a challenge to us. So through the course of this talk, I'm going to give you 3 specific examples of where our customers used the data that they had, but analyzed it differently to do things like grow their lifetime value and average order value, things like that. When I go through these things, typically people have questions. So, at the end of this, if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me. What I would really, my goal in this conversation with you is to ensure that you walk away with like specific ways that you can go do something with your data. So if you're not walking out of here with like that kind of tactical level information, then I haven't done my job, and I'm happy to either take questions at the end of this or I'll be on the panel as well at the end. So the other piece I'd say is I was meeting with some of our customers yesterday, and they asked this question, you know, who do I have to have on my team to be able to leverage RJ metrics or to just leverage data? So the piece that I want you to walk away from here as well is that you need to have certain people, you need to have certain processes, you need to have certain tools, and that's just what it is, right? That's exactly what we've been talking about all morning, and that's the kind of running thing through the three examples that I'll walk you through, is that it took all three of those things. We'll just go here. Okay, let's just go ahead and jump into the examples. So the first one is of an e-commerce company that is in the US, but some of their customers do live outside of the US. They're in the fashion space, about 10 to 50 million in revenue, right? Well-established business. They came to us. They're a user of the tool, but that doesn't really matter. You can use any number of tools for quite a few types of analysis. And so they said to us, you know, we're stuck on this almost quarterly promotion where we do a buy one, get one free. Well, theirs is a kind of a handmade, custom-made product. So that meant that 4 times a year, they are going to go into an operational frenzy, right, hiring a bunch of people to service all of these orders, and then what do they do with all of that stuff, right? So that was one of the questions they had. And the other is, you know, we'd like to just grow our revenue, repeat revenue from our customers. But the thing about it is their kind of product, you don't need more than, I mean, there's going to be a very small number of people who need more than one of those every 1 or 2 years, right? Once every 1 or 2 years. So the question is that really the right question to be asking? So we looked at, I apologize, these slides kind of came out a little funny, but here's the interesting thing. When we started to look at their data, their product, it takes a big effort to actually create an account in their database, right? So this isn't you land on their website and there's the landing page that says, give us our email, give us your email address and now we'll start marketing to you. No. To get a user ID into their database, you had to go through about 10 screens of really specific personal information. That's a pretty big hurdle already. Even with that big hurdle, they still had 40% of their accounts who had never purchased a single product. That's huge. And our question was, why are you so focused on trying to get repeat revenue from users who typically are not going to need this product all that often, but it's a vital product, they just don't need to buy it that often. Why? Let's look at this base of 40% that have never purchased, because you spent money to acquire them. They spent time on your site to create a bunch of information and store it in order to create the account, but they've never purchased, right? So we scoped the problem that way. And you know, what had they tried in terms of trying to get these people? So we've all done these things. They did landing page optimization, they did conversion flow optimization, they did retargeting. They're doing all these great things, all these typical things that we all do, right, using any number of Google and non-Google tools. But they still haven't cracked that 40%. That 40% had stayed pretty consistent. So what did we try? We did product analysis. We said, all right, well, people who have purchased at least one time, what did they purchase? Let's put more of that product in front of these never purchasers. That was our idea. So we dug into the products and we kind of realized, you know, there wasn't that much to be told from product analysis. And by the way, the other thing about shifting your mindset in this is a lot of lines of inquiry are going to lead you absolutely nothing useful, right? And that's okay, because knowing that certain things aren't relevant to actually optimizing your KPIs is also a line of, is a useful line of inquiry. We also looked at their acquisition sources. Are some of those acquisition sources giving you better conversion rates versus others? There wasn't all that much to be said there. Guess what? It was like Google, CPC. And there were some keywords in there, but there's a whole lot of, you know, keywords that were all relatively the same. So that wasn't a big place for us to optimize. We even looked at their email content. So they do a ton of email. We actually made them do work to bring the email data into RJ Metrics, right? So RJ Metrics is basically a warehouse of all your data. So they did the work to bring their Bronto email data into RJ Metrics. We looked at that, and there wasn't that much telling there. So this is kind of frustrating. So we figured out that it's not about the campaigns, it's not about the products, and it's not about the content of the emails you're using to convert them. These are all tricks that we've all tried to do, right? So we said, well, what about time? How does time come into this? You have 40% of people who have never purchased, and they put all this effort. What can we say about, you know, what happens over time with those customers? So we said the initial probability of their purchasing, of making a first purchase, is 68%, right? So if their initial probability is 68%, how come you have 40% of people who've never purchased, right? Like the math doesn't work out there. So we looked at that a little bit more. So if you look at this graph, you'll see that if the x-axis is the number of days since they created their account, you'll see that already by the end of day 1, 24 hours into it, you're at 20%. So wow, on day 1, you drop that initial probability 48 percentage points. So what's happening on day 1? So we dug a little deeper. What happens over the course of those first 24 hours? Well, you'll see that in that first hour, the probability drops from that initial 68% down to 29%. So you've already lost about half your chance of converting them ever. So all that retargeting you're doing 3 weeks later, 1 week later, 2 days later, all of that has no value. All the emails that you're sending, all of that has very little impact. So we dug into that first hour, and we saw that these are the first 60 minutes on the x-axis. We saw that basically you have about 10 to 12 minutes to get them to purchase in a reasonable amount of the same probability of their initial likelihood to purchase. Wow. So again, the money being spent on email optimization, the money and the time being spent on retargeting, the money and the time being spent on all the other analysis that we did, which led us to these set of conclusions, told us basically that we were doing all of those things in a wrong way because we weren't really utilizing the time variable. Sure, most of us do execute retargeting and email campaigns within some reasonable time frame, right? Like we'll probably execute them for about a week to 2 weeks, whatever, that kind of thing. You may even have lead conversion campaigns that run for 3 months after they first sign up with you, trying to get them to purchase. But the reality was with this particular customer, that time just didn't matter. So what we suggested they do is actually look at their retargeting email campaign in terms of that first hour. And with that, they saw a significant benefit to their sort of pool of unconverted leads, right? So here, the interesting thing wasn't more data. They had all of this data. It was all sitting inside of their database. It wasn't even about new interesting platforms. At the end of this, I'll say most of the analysis that you can do, it is easier and is more efficient to use tools to do it. But a lot of this analysis you can do pen and paper and Excel and that sort of thing, right? So what was the takeaway here? It's just using the same data but differently analyzed. So a second example. This is a B2B subscription-based SaaS company. Also in the U.S., but with customers all over the world, 2 to 10 million in revenue. And so they came to us and they said, we want to grow the number of months on subscription. We want to grow the lifetime value. They have, multiple tiers to their pricing. They have a couple of interesting things. So when you go to buy a cell phone purchase, you've got those multiple plans. And they have the different rows. Well, you have this many minutes per month, this many SMSs per month, you have this much data, you can use all of these. So they had about, 15 rows to each of their pricing plans. It was all the clever idea of, a group of people who thought we should create pricing plans based on all this, the gold standard, the platinum standard, the silver, and so on, and the custom. On top of all that, there was the custom plan as well. And they have a 14-day trial period before you convert to paid, right? So what they wanted to do was increase their trial to paid conversion and also increase their lifetime value months on subscription. They're not synonymous, but fairly similar. So what did we do? Their hunch was that if we can get more of our trial users to do more things in those first 14 days, we have a higher chance of converting them. Not an unreasonable hypothesis, but that was certainly their hypothesis. They have a product, they have that has many features and functionality. The more we can get customers to use the product in the course of that first 14 days, the higher the likelihood they'll convert. And not just the higher the likelihood they'll convert, they'll become stickier, they'll become more engaged, and they will stay on subscription for longer, and they'll eventually migrate levels, which will mean that they become more successful from an LTV standpoint. So we said we'd help them do that. So the first thing we looked at is, well, how many, they track a ton of data around what users are doing inside of the system, inside of the product, as many product companies do. And so what we saw is that with the x-axis here being the number of events that the user had in those first 30 days, what was the average months on paid subscription? Well, you'll see that really the more events you have, it has nothing to do with the number of months on paid subscription. So that So that probably is not necessarily a good idea to get them to do more stuff. Not necessarily that it's a bad idea, but that's not going to be the thing that gets you more trial to paid conversion, as well as more lifetime value or months on paid subscription. We also tried looking at the number of the number of events in that first month versus the customer lifetime value, right? And what we see here is that, again, it's all over the place. There's nothing, useful to be said about, sure, there's some initial increase, but then as you start to get, beyond a certain threshold, and having, 13 events isn't all that many, you don't really see any big small c correlation to customer lifetime value. And the point that I'm trying to share with you through this is that, again, quite a bit of optimizing your e-commerce or your subscription-based businesses is not going to be about magically looking at a set of data and saying, that's the right answer, right? That's going to double my customer lifetime value. You have to go down different lines of inquiry. And it's a human process. There is some hunting and pecking. The point is to be smart with your hunting and pecking. And so here, for us, part of being smart is about getting these things done quickly because, again, customers don't necessarily have, aren't particularly patient. So we looked at this and we said, well, that's not very helpful. And then another thing we looked at was we said, well, how does the product utilization, translate in terms of their plan level? And from here, too, we see that there isn't all that much to be said about how much the product is utilized and people and their tier. So all those features and all those sort of elements of the pricing plans that have to do with using the product, not necessarily have anything to do with getting people to upgrade over time. This was not very fun for our customers, although there were a couple of people on the team who were very excited to see that what we were talking about was probably simplifying their pricing plans, right? So finally we said, well, what's the last thing that we could do? So one of the things, actually, what I should say is that we took a bunch of stuff in their database and we ran a correlation analysis against customer lifetime value and months on subscription. Out of the hundreds of things we did that analysis on, there was only about 3 or 4 that came out as even just statistically significant. 2 to 3 of those things were noise. And the one thing that ended up mattering for them was that the number of users in their company who were using the product was directly correlated to lifetime value. 1. And out of that complex pricing plan that I told you about, which is really fun for a potential customer to look at and figure out whether they want to purchase your product or not, just one light item, the number of users, right? And if you look at this, you see where the x-axis is the number of users, you'll see that the average months on paid subscription actually ties in very nicely with that, right? So then what does this mean? Out of all the ideas that they had they had just actually installed, they were planning to install Pardot, we're upgrading their email service, all of this to drive lots more activity. Well, through the correlation analysis, we figured out that all that activity, actually people who did a ton of activity in the first 14 days, the first 30 days, didn't stay as long, right? So, and often what you'll find is that for products that have, or tools that have like a trial period and then like a paid period, you'll find that the people who use your product a lot in those first 14 days actually end up going like this, right? They're like a little bit frenetic about using the product. They want to get, they have certain expectations. They're testing you out, and then they're not going to actually convert at the end of the day. And honestly, an interesting data point in there as well is that in that first 14 days, the people who used your product a lot on day 1 were the worst, right? And my hypothesis, which I see off of quite a few sets of data, is that what B2B product purchaser is going to sign up and make their decision essentially, in day 1. We all know what it takes. Oh, we sign up. And then we tell, like tomorrow we'll start configuring it. Maybe over the next few days we bring in some team members and say, hey, we just started trialing this product. So the people who go a little bit crazy on those first couple of days aren't necessarily going to be your best customers, right? And through the correlation analysis we did for this customer, we figured out that indeed doing more in the beginning was not tied to having better outcomes. In fact, the people who sort of slowly staged, theirs is the type of product where you sort of you do something with it, then other people do something with the thing that you created, and so on and so forth. So there's this sort of multi-step process to their type of product. And the people who actually kind of had more time between those things were the ones that ended up becoming customers for years. Right? It's very counterintuitive to your email marketing efforts that think that it's all about driving people who haven't done something in the past 5 days. Right? And you'll see here that, again, lifetime value increased with the number of users for this customer. And again, it's really just the number of users that was the one driving factor for this business. So what did we do from there? We reduced the complexity of the pricing plan, which improves conversion rates, right? Initial conversion rates. Also, through all this email marketing that we talked about and the on-site customization, because in any software product online, you have all kinds of opportunities for driving certain behaviors. We just push that one behavior. You track the people that are adding users to their account, and you track the people that are not adding users to their account and get them to do that, right? Because that's really the differentiating factor, and that's all that matters. And lastly, an e-commerce business, actually this isn't true, it's Canada-based, again with a large North American and European user base, 10 to 50 million in revenue. They were very much, and they still are very much in customer acquisition mode, right? So what was their question? They are spending tons and tons in media, lots and lots of placements, using lots of different ad platforms, certainly using, you know, Google, Bing, Yahoo, etc., but also Facebook, and then a ton of affiliate stuff, and I mean, just trying everything. And while each of those tools, or many of those tools, offer a way to analyze the performance, at least for initial conversion and initial average order value, you don't really have a way. I mean, we all know that the multiple tools means that you have to figure out whether all these different tools are telling you the same story, or a story that makes sense in a comparable, when it comes to comparing the data. And they didn't have a systematic way for evaluating the efficacy of each of these ad placements. And in particular, a lot of their ad placements drove a few initial conversions. Right, so you had one placement that drove maybe 2 conversions, another, but consistently. So the question is the 2 that you're getting from, you know, this small ad placement any better or worse than the 10 that you got from another one, or the 100 that you got from another one? So what did they try to do in terms of trying to optimize this ad spend? They tried conversion rate optimization. They looked at order values. They even started to institute some pretty complex attribution modeling. Right? Because when you have such scattered conversion, the question becomes, well, do those people that convert from there eventually buy through other sources, right? So they tried all of these things. And then came the moment where they sort of said, well, what if we looked at something beyond conversion rates and, you know, the cost per click and that sort of thing? Again, take the same data and analyze it differently. So they married up the enormous number of low volume placement data that they had and the conversions from that, and looked at actually the repeat purchase behavior of that, right? And that's not something that any of those ad tools will be able to tell you. That's data that's in your own database as long as you're storing it. So when they did that, they noticed that these ad placements that only sent you maybe 2 or 3 conversions a month or something were sending you much higher LTV, customer lifetime value customers. Right? So maybe it's only 2 or 3 conversions a month, but these people had 3 to 4x the CLV of some of the other larger placements. Again, look at the same data, but just analyze it differently. And so when they did that, they noticed a ton of these kinds of things that had above average customer lifetime value. So if you have a little bit of patience and don't just analyze for the initial conversion, but you analyze over a longer period of time, there's a ton more. There's a ton more to spend in all of those smaller volume placements. So essentially, we made it easier for them to do that. It's just a measurement and tools question, and we'll talk about the people, processes, and tools in a moment. And they proceeded to scale their volume and get a ton more customers with better lifetime value. That doesn't mean they can stop on the big platforms, because there's volume there, right? I mean, you can't ignore the volume. But it does mean you can smartly spend in areas where you couldn't necessarily see that before. So when it comes to how do you get to doing these kinds of things, there's basically three things. So there's the data itself, right? So one of the key challenges that you have when you have all these different data sets is how do you marry it together? And what I encourage you not to do is to be worried about making it marry together perfectly. No marriage is perfect. Just think about marrying it together in a way that works for you to get some insights, right? Like you may just need to, if you're trying to match things up based on the UTM campaigns, if you have a ton of data that doesn't necessarily match up from your GA data and what you're storing in your database, that's okay as long as it's directionally accurate. But you need to be able to marry up these data sources. The other thing is, don't, and I love this before, interesting is useless, right? Like, don't get caught up in trying to figure out, wouldn't it be really cool to know if blah, blah, blah? Who cares? Do you have time to go figure that out, and is that going to be useful? You don't know if it's going to necessarily be useful. So, I mean, my mantra generally is do what you think is computationally possible. And I don't mean computationally possible from, I mean, there's 20 million computers, right outside our door. So it's not a question of what's actually technically possible, but what's possible given your time, your organizational patience around this analysis, and your resources, right? And so focus on those questions that are computationally possible. And as you sort of start to have successes there, in general, you will get more of those things anyway. So you can start to, expand your horizons. The other thing, and the folks before me spoke about this, so well earlier, which is you need to have people, to answer my customers' questions from yesterday when I visited them, what kind of people do you need to have? You need to have, it would be really nice if you had the one person on your team who knew how to both ask the right marketing questions and analyze and run the queries and draw the insights and recommendations from it and go execute the tactics and then go do all of this all over again, right? That's pretty damn rare. So what we like to do is say that, the people that are on the marketing side or the business side, ask the right questions. Don't say, I want a chart that shows me this and that and, give the specific specs like that. You're limiting the creativity of your analysts when you do that. I get this all the time. I have a team of really smart, they all seem to be 20-something, which I'm no longer, haven't been for a while, analysts at RJ Metrics. And I started out that way. I started out saying, I need a chart that does, I thought I was making their lives easier. Right? I'd say I want a chart that does this and a chart that does this and shows me, customer lifetime value by this property and that. Essentially a spec. What turned out is I was limiting the creativity by doing that. And there's a bunch of smart people out in the world, in your companies, etc., who know how to run queries, who know how to think about data or get them. They just don't know where to kind of focus their energies. And so the culture of data and the right people and the processes is having the people who know how to ask good questions but somewhat open-ended and people who know how to take that and run with it, right? And that for us at RJ Metrics has been really successful. For me and my previous company was also really successful. And finally, as I said before, you can do a lot in Excel. That's the reality. You can. The reason all these tools exist out there is to make those things a little bit easier, a little bit faster. But don't expect any tool to tell you from end to end, what data should I capture, what is the data telling me, what is the exact insight and recommendation. Sure, there are tools that will do that for a very narrow scoped question, but eventually you will run out of potential for optimization from what that tool can do and it really does do for you. It really does take the marriage of a tool that makes your life a little bit more efficient and smart people and the right questions to make this kind of optimization possible. My contact info. That's it.
Thank you very much, Anita. If you want to pose any questions to Anita or any of our other panelists later on, do obviously feel free to pose those via hashtag Future of Data. So Anita, that was a great talk. Things I took away from that: use the data you have better. The same data but with different analysis can deliver far better, more insightful results. So case studies reframing timescales from weeks to minutes, focusing on key areas, in this case adding users, and the importance of analyzing over different time frames. So fascinating. Thank you very much for that. Next up, we have two speakers from Opta, the sports company, Simon Ferrant, who is Marketing Coordinator, and John Coulson, Head of Professional Football. They are going to provide a view from the sports world. Guys, over to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having us here. It's going to be a little bit of a change of pace here. I'm going to provide a bit of an overview about what we actually do and how we're helping data to change the way we consume sports, but also then leave John to do all the cool stuff and talk about how data is actually changing the way professional clubs within sports are actually run and operating. That's going to be the overview I'm going to do, kind of whistle-stop tour about how the organisation is run and how we collect the data itself. There's plenty more information available on the website, and if you can't get in contact, we can give that information to you as well. I always have a quick check of the delegate list when it comes to something like this, so I can get away with saying something like that, which is the world's leading sports data company. We believe it. We think it's true. We collect a vast amount of sports information, detailed sports information, on a number of core European sports, but then also sports across the world as well. We also have a very active and passionate following on social media, nearly 1 million Twitter followers across our various accounts. So if you have not seen us and you're a sports fan, you can have a look at us on Twitter. Our headquarters are based here in London, in Waterloo. Then we have offices all over the world. So basically, what we do, we collect sports data. We watch a lot of sport, football, rugby, cricket are our they're core sports. And we turn it into stuff like this. So the far picture here you can see is from a BT Sport Premier League match. They're showing Liverpool's average position there. This is the official Barclays Premier League app, showing some statistics there that have come direct from our database. And this is some work we've done in rugby, the RFU and IBM, to produce a Keys to the Game program via their website. Here's some of the editorial work we've done to provide greater context to more traditional media, print media, not only in Marca in Spain, but also in cricket data there as well, in the All Out Cricket. How do we collect that data? We collect it all from video screens. So we use collection analysts to watch the game. 3 people per game. 1 person doing the home team, 1 person doing the away team, and then a checker doing live quality control. The key point to note with our data is that it's all live. We collect information during the game as it's happening, which allows us to work with the vast number of clients that we do. And the screen that those guys are using is something that looks like this. They're using the mouse to track where the ball is on the pitch. They're using hotkeys on a keyboard to not only denote which player is touching the ball, but also the what it is they're actually doing. To give you an example, we collect something along the lines of 16 different types of pass. We will collect what sort of tackle it is, whether it's a duel, an aerial duel, where the shot is, where the goalkeeper is when the shot's taken. And what that adds up to is around 1,600 to 2,000 actions from every football match. The data then gets collected on this screen at the bottom and is then fed into our database. And that's pretty much replicable across rugby and cricket as well, but I'm going to focus on football for the purposes of this this talk, purely because of the time constraints we have. And so that gets turned into something that I'm sure many, many more people in this room are familiar with than I am, an XML feed. So every action has a timestamp, has an XY coordinate associated with it, the player associated with it, and the action type itself. And from there, data can get turned into something like this. Now, this might be quite pixelated because it's such a big screen.
We've got a clip here, a great example where you see the very, very best of...
Oh, sorry guys, we'll just go back to the start of that video. I'm not sure what happened there.
That that I noticed in commentary, we're at the game, you get a good position of it. If you just look at that, those touches, none inside the 18-yard box. And I suppose to me, that is the one bit that next, I suppose the defensive bit, but forget about that for a second. Really getting into the 18-yard box, getting into those positions, the number 10, where you can score goals. And we've got a trip here.
So that's Gary Neville on Sky Sports Monday Night Football, who's analysing Ross Barkley, who I'm sure you're all aware is England's great hope for the World Cup when Roy's boys bring the trophy back. He's going to be at the forefront of all the glory. But that was done immediately after the game because the action is being collected live from our offices, sent straight out to broadcasters and integrated into their broadcast feeds. This is a website called Squawker, another one of our clients, and they display the information we're collecting graphically. Again, updated live during the game, and they use it to build ad revenue and build a social following as well. And we also work with big name brands, provide background for sponsorships and for advertising and for campaigns. Obviously with Adidas here, again, the data is just sent through into a graphical template, and they can use it to build a campaign advertising these the boots. So that's the automated process, but then there's also an editorial process as well. So we employ skilled people to mine the database, to turn these reams of data, these terabytes of data, into something that's palatable for what you'd imagine is an audience that isn't traditionally particularly into their statistics or into their data. So they use it to give context to reports, media reports in print media, and also what we call optifacts, which are digestible snippets of information that may help a bookmaker or also are perfect for social media as well. So that means we work with people like this, across a broad range of sectors across sport, some very high-profile teams, federations, bookmakers, broadcasters, you name it, we work with them really in the sports industry. And, as of very recently, started working with Google as well for an event in San Francisco next month as well. So, how does that type of information, something like this, help him? Or him? Or even him? Professional football, much like many, many professional sports, are very skeptical of data, very don't often believe in its power, don't often understand. So part of our challenge is to not only collect the data in a timely and in an accurate and consistent manner, but also convince clubs that it's possible to make this useful, to actually directly impact on their on-pitch performance. This is where I'm going to hand over to John. He's going to talk about some of the work that we've done with clubs.
Yeah, so I'm just going to jump in and appreciate this is quite a niche insight into the data world that we have in sport. I'm going to try and draw some parallels really between the challenges we face with the professional teams and maybe some of the challenges you have in the wider business. So, as Simon said, sports is all about guts and instinct, right? So coaches, they hate data, they're terrified of it, and particularly they're worried it's going to tell them something that they don't know. Which for us, we're open-minded. We think, well, yeah, that'd be great, but they see that almost as a weakness, and maybe they should already know it. So what we're trying to do is help teams and educate them that data is a tool. We can help them be a little bit more efficient in the decisions that they're making day to day. And almost to draw, I guess an analogy like medical science can make a diagnosis, right? But we still need a doctor to interpret that in relation to the patient. That's what we're trying to help coaches do in a couple of different ways. So firstly, with player recruitment. So Steve Houston, who's at Sunderland, is one of our clients. He's part of a new breed of guys that are data guys working in football, and they're working with the old guard, the old guys who rely on guts. And Steve's really realizing that, I don't know how many of you really follow football, but I'm sure everybody knows that the amount of money that is spent on football players is just phenomenal. It's ridiculous, and so often. That money, those investments are made with very, very little due diligence. It's, gut instinct and feel. And Steve's one of the first guys that's coming into the industry and going, well, actually, a player is an asset, and we can use data to make better decisions on our investment in that asset. So what we're helping teams do now is use, like, this is one of our products as a dashboard where a club can come in and they can almost create a template of the perfect player. So what height is he? What language does he speak? What age is he? Does he pass the ball in this way? Does he win the ball in this way? And almost, filter down the hundreds of thousands of players a team could recruit from to just maybe 30 or 40 that they should then focus their attention on. So for this list here, there's loads of guys we know who Ronaldo is, we know who Suarez is, but there's guys in there that we might never have heard of. And then we can go in using all the historic data we've got and plot how their career is progressing. So every player as he's coached, generally their career follows a bell curve. We can see how they're progressing. Whereabouts is this player on that curve, and is he the right investment for us? If he is, we can then send the scouts, because it's not all about science. It's an art versus science debate, but we can then send our scouts to go and do the stuff that we can't draw on a graph. So what's the guy's personality like? What's his awareness like? So it's a blend of both data sets. And ultimately, hopefully we end up with a successful signing. So if we've got both sources of data, we've got the old school kind of traditional understanding of the game mixed with the data. And it's, American owners like the likes of Liverpool that are starting to implement this much more data-driven business due diligence into the sport. Other area that we fit into is actually in-game analysis. So this screenshot, that's during the European Championships last summer. That's the England analyst laptop. So he would go in at the dressing room at half-time and he can give the team some information that might give them an advantage in the second half and dictate the tactics that might be required to win the game. And that quote there is almost, again, related to the coaches, and that they almost believe they can see everything in the game. And it's not a weakness, it's just a limitation of our brains, that we cannot consume all of the information that's happening on the field at one time. And data is a tool that can almost act as another set of eyes and give them a better perspective on what's happening. So we provide lots of different interfaces that teams can use at half-time and full-time to feed information back to the players. So the players we're trying to coach, we're trying to improve their performance. How do they improve unless they know what they did wrong? And if they don't know what they did right, then it must be an accident, right? So we're using data to help coaches feed back to players. And then the other area we're working on is opposition scouting, so assessing our opponents. So this summer at the World Cup, we'll be working with Brazil. This is them at the Confederations Cup, just after we started working with them. And their analysts will be using video and data aligned together. So we'll be using our stats to index video and allow them to assess every facet of their opposition's performance, every little piece of information about the opponents that they're going to face in the tournament. And they'll use tools like this where you've got a data search engine, you've got some data visualizations, and then also all of that synced together with video. The importance of the video is that we're feeding this information back to football players, right? So they're not going to understand, no disrespect to them, but if we start talking about regression analysis and R-squared scores, then it's not really going to help them. So this, for example, this Pedro at Manchester City, with Zabaleta here, and he'll be on the iPad using video clips that have been derived from our data to give the player some information about the guy he's going to be facing in the next game. And Zabaleta, when he's playing, most of the decisions he's making are on gut instinct and feel and judgment. And hopefully, if we give him a little bit more information, he can make those decisions that split second faster. And collectively across the team, if everybody's better informed, hopefully the overall team's going to perform better. So largely that's where we're at in the pro space. But where is all this going? And the thing where we're moving towards is more advanced analytics. So really putting the data in the hands of the guys that have got the skills to really analyze it. And I don't know how many of you saw this film. Probably, unless Brad Pitt had been in it, it would have gone completely unnoticed. But really, this is about analytics in baseball. So baseball is a sport really well known for embracing numbers. And for us in football, so far we've been very good at counting how often stuff happens, but not saying what was real quality behind it, like what was the difference, rather than just how often something happened. So I'm probably going to go into too much detail here, so I'll skim over this, but just to give you an example of where we're going, really. So this is all the shots in one season of the Premier League. So loads, every little dot represents a shot on goal. And if you imagine in your mind that over 5 seasons, over 10 leagues, that's over 500,000 shots on goal. So colossal amount of information. And what it allows us to do is say that somebody shoots from the corner of the box with their left foot following a fast break. We know that that happened 2,000 times before only one guy scored. So we know the probability of you scoring from the same situation is very small. So if we take a step back and look at all the players' shots this season, what we can do is predict what the data would suggest that player should score from those same chances. And this is probably, again, too much data on the screen, but if you see there's this is all the players in the top 5 leagues ranked this season as far as the top scorer, but this XG score is the number of goals our modelling would suggest he should score. So he scored 30, we'd expect 18.
acquisition, persuasion, and conversion. So usually companies, they start with an untargeted acquisition. So you bring lots of people to the website, but you don't know anything about the people, so you don't manage to persuade them to buy something. Then as you start using analytics in a more smart way, you start understanding people and you persuade them to look at the product page or something. And you can get to a place where you persuade people and then they get to the conversion page and the button doesn't appear to them because they're using Internet Explorer or something. But and then analytics will help you find those bugs and solve those problems and improve the experience of your customers. Now this is the tequila shot, right? It's the last one, and maybe you'll bring less people, but they're more targeted and you understand them better, so you manage to persuade them into doing something on the website. So that's the overall goal of analytics and using data on an organization. I like very much this process, which is you bring people, you define goals for your website, and very often also people, they define one goal. I'm trying to sell something on the website, and that's a limited way of looking at things. You should define several goals, like macro goals and micro goals. Things like subscribing to a newsletter, or things that will lead people to buy, or just adding a product to a cart is a micro goal, while selling something is a macro goal. And once you know all the goals of the website, you go into building KPIs, key performance indicators, which will be the numbers that you'll use to track if you're performing well or not. And once you have all of these, then you start collecting the data, which is very important to know exactly which data and how the data will be collected. And you start analyzing data, and of course, if you don't use this data for something, it's not useful, and maybe you should spend your time doing something else. And so you analyze, you find alternatives, you start doing tests, and then implement things and analyze again, and you should revisit the funnel again, in a while, see if you have more goals and more data that you should be collecting. Now, this is not the web analytics process. This is a web analytics process. There are other analytics processes, and this one is by Nathan Yao. He wrote a book called Data Point, which is a very good book on data visualization and how to use data to make better decisions. So he says that you should have 4 questions when you start using data. The first one, what data do you have, right? Do you have data? If you don't have any data, you should start collecting. But if you have some data, what do you want to know about the data, right? And once you know what you want to know about the data, do you have this data? If you don't have, you should start collecting. If you don't have the data, if you have the data, what kind of visualization? And then what do you see? And does it make sense? I mean, there are different ways to look at data, and they are good for different companies. So, for example, for startups, this might be more interesting because it's more interactive, and you should find or tailor-made process for you, because just grabbing another process and trying to implement it in your organization might be not very wise. So let's talk about the organization, and that's by the same. By the way, I didn't give credit to Bonkers World. He's a Googler. His name is Manu Cornet, and he does these amazing cartoons. So he's talking about the organization types. You can see Amazon, Google, Facebook, and Apple. And I would like to use those organization types to talk about what kind of analytics structure you should have in the company. So first of all, I like to look at the 3 main aspects when I'm thinking about, should I hire an analyst? Should it be centralized, decentralized? How should it be, implemented in the organization? And the first one is knowledge, right? So I have newbies, companies that are just starting with analytics, and savvy analysts, so companies very advanced. And then company size, which is small and big organizations. And percentage of revenue, what's the percentage of online in the total revenue? So I think those three aspects are very important when it comes to deciding what kind, what kind of structure do you need in the organization? Should you have one analyst? Should you have multiple analysts, or where should they be? So if we have 3 aspects with 2 values, how many options do we have? It's not hard. That's 2 times 2 times 2, right? That's 8. So we have this 8 options, and if I newbie, large, high percentage, savvy, large, high percentage, newbie, small organization, high percentage of revenue, and then so on and so forth. Now, so we have the yellow ones. I'm not talking about them because they have a low percentage of revenue, of online revenue, but it's not that black and white, because that's why I used green and yellow, because it's not black and white. If you have a low percentage in a huge organization, it can be a lot of money, but I'm going to talk about companies that are very worried about the online revenue. And let's talk about those 4 types. And when I look at them, what I think is, I see those 4 models. And so, for example, I think that an organization that doesn't know a lot about analytics, is small, and have a high percentage of revenue, should be using this type of model, because you're centralized, you're small, and you don't know a lot about analytics, so you should probably hire very good analyst and make him be in the center of the company, and he will answer all the questions and be the champion in the organization. If you have a savvy organization, which is small with a high percentage, I think you should have maybe more than one analyst, some kind of hierarchical way. Now, if you're a large organization, you probably need more than one analyst. You probably need a few of them, and they should be interconnected, because they're all learning the analytics, how to do analytics in the organization, and I think this model is very good. And if you're savvy, large, and you have a high percentage, like Google, it's you should have various people, various analysts that they're interconnected, and they're very they're not the center of the organization, but they're everywhere. Now, one of the things that you should be careful about is not to become this, right? So that's the organization chart from the same cartoon that I just mentioned. So try not to fight, or not, everyone should be friendly in the organization. Now, let's talk a little bit about, the people. We're talking about the organization and how to organize it, but let's talk about the people that you should have in the organization, right? So this is Avinash Kaushik, digital marketing evangelist at Google. And one of the things that he's very well known for is this quote: 90% of web analytics success lies in the people you have behind the tools, right? Because if you have amazing tools, but if people, they don't use them, it's pretty useless. So I would like to talk about, I think that, one of the reasons that analytics didn't grow as much as, we predicted a few years ago is that, people looked at web analytics in a very naive way, that, there is a profession called web analytics, which is not the case. I think there are 4 types of people that do analytics, and we're starting to recognize that. And you need those 4 skills in all organizations to succeed. First one, people that understand the business, right? So if you're analyzing something, you should know what's the value of doing the analysis, what's the ROI, where should I focus, and what will bring me the biggest revenue. Those people, they're really important when it comes to web analytics. The second type, the guys that know the Greek letters, so the hardcore analysts that that can take a data set and analyze it, and make the transition between data and insights, and then action. Now, Software engineers, of course, we need them for everything, and very often we have to change the code of the website and do smart things to measure smart things, and they're very important. And as Avinash said, there is a fourth type, which is the data puke. So people that just take the data and puke and just send data for everyone, and they're not very useful, but they are everywhere. So be careful. So a few takeaways. First of all, planning. Not planning is a plan. So it's better to invest in planning. The resources, the kind of outcome that you're looking for. So it's very important to plan and implement it as as good as you can. Implement, again, there are all kinds of processes. I think it's really important to invest the time to find the best process for your company that will work with the people that you have. Then organizing, so it's important to understand that it's different for every company. How many analysts do you need, where they should sit in the organization, and sometimes the best option might also be to hire an agency to help you build the set of skills that you need, or to fill parts that you don't want to hire for. Humanizing, you have to find the best people, and I know that this is really hard, to find good people that will do the work. Thank you, and happy analyzing.
Thanks very much, Daniel. And I think that's the last of our talks today. And just Daniel, I think pretty much every talk focused on the importance of great people to organizing around data. So I think that's one of the really important themes here. I'm now going to welcome Aidan Rouse, one of our hosts today from Google, to come up and introduce the guests that he has for the panel session. So Aidan, over to you. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed the show so far.
All right, cheers, Nigel. Sorry, it's a bit loud. So we're going to have about, I think, 20 minutes. So we said we'd let you guys out of here, 25 minutes. We'd let you guys out of here at about 12:30. So we're going to have 3 of our speakers come up and join me for that panel. So we're going to have Andy, Martin, and Anita just come up and join me on stage. Take a seat. I don't think I'm important enough to get a seat, so I just have to stand, if that's okay with you. It's not a bit kind of game show host type situation. There's no right or wrong answers, okay? sit by your names, why not? Yeah. All right, so I mean, I think Nigel has done a really great job summarizing all the chats that we've had today, but I think there's definitely some strong themes have come out of today. I'm going to ask a couple of questions that I just have in my head from some of the chats. It'd be great to hear some questions from the floor. So if you do have any, my trusty and beautiful assistant, Dave, over the other side of the room there, has got a mic that he's going to be roving around the room with in order to take some of your questions. So please do ask those questions as they come into your head. So the first thing, and actually Daniel almost kind of finished on it, and Nigel mentioned it as well, is that we've been talking a lot about tools, talking a lot about data, but I think the one thing that people mentioned a lot was that actually people are key, right? So it's actually trying to find that right balance, and I guess that's kind of what my first question is. It's kind of, does everybody, first of all, I guess, does everybody need to be an analyst? So does everybody that you hire have to have some kind of a skill set that's embedded within that kind of analysis? And secondly, how do you find the right balance between kind of analysts and everybody else? And as Daniel kind of put out there as a thought, where do those people sit, and how do they actually translate that knowledge across the organization? I'll put that to Martin, first of all, seeing as you definitely talked about this quite a bit, and that's what Forward3D are really known for.
Yeah, I mean, we are a client-facing organisation, and we only hire analysts. So we don't have account directors, group account directors, blokes in shiny suits. We don't do that, and my philosophy is that you can teach an analyst to speak to a client, but you can't necessarily teach a client-facing person to write SQL. And that's pretty much how it works. Yeah, that's us.
Andy, what do you think about you've been so Andy joined Google a few months ago, having been client side and agency side, Mediacom I believe, and Money Supermarket, and now Google. So I think that's a nice well-rounded experience of different types of organizations and how they might do it. I think my experience of working in Google is I think we do actually strike quite a good balance between analysts and sales guys, if you will. What's your experience of your few months here?
So yeah, I mean, I think as you say, my experience at Google, being on the inside has been kind of 4 months. Obviously, I've worked with Google for a long period of time in different roles, both client side and agency side. So yeah, I mean, I think Google as a business is inherently data-led, and that means that we need to have some very smart people that are capable of translating data and insight into a narrative that we can share with typically in my role fairly senior fairly senior executives. So that could be the CEO, for example, of an insurance company, or a CMO. And I think part of it is absolutely being able. It's the translation of the insight, and how that narrative is shared. That is a really critical piece. And I kind of take Martin's point in regard to being able to train analysts. My personal view is that some of the analysts perhaps struggle with connecting in terms of sharing those kind of narratives sometimes in perhaps a way that an account kind of director can. But it's an interesting balance, right?
So in a way, it has to be a bit of a happy marriage between the guys who can really crunch the data and also the guys who can kind of convert that into a conversation, or even within Google or other media owners, potentially into a sales piece, potentially, right?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, let's Google is a media business. That's what we do. But I do think sometimes it is about the translation, and it is about being able to construct a narrative that's really relevant. And part of that comes from really understanding the organisation and some of the business challenges. And the only way you're going to do that, is to actually spend time with the key people in the organisation. So I think, it's that challenge. And I'm not saying, what Google do is perfect. I think,
Does anyone think Google should have more salespeople?
I think I'd rather be doing what Google does than what Microsoft does, by the looks of what Daniel was showing us earlier. Anyway, yeah. I don't think we've gotten to that stage yet. Maybe we're not there yet. We haven't been around long enough. And Anita, I mean, you're within the client analytics team. You're heading up that team. But how do you guys ensure that the work that you've done is kind of properly understood by the people that potentially go out and sell to clients, or go out and do this work with clients, or do you guys work directly with your clients? What's that kind of relationship? What's that balance like in your company?
We work directly with our customers. So everybody that we work with is a product subscription customer for RJ Metrics, right? And so we're just hopefully adding value. Mm-hmm. I completely agree with what Andy said in terms of translation. So I think it's really important to think about what the company that you're working with, who they are. So you can have these really great startup businesses that are minting money that only have like 3 people, and the CEO is also the guy doing the tech and is also asking all these questions, right? To very large organizations who maybe who are actually less data savvy. And so what we find actually ends up being very important is that our account managers, our client analytics services people, whomever those are, they're helping to actually direct the inquiry, right? Push back on the customer. Do you really need to be thinking about the latest new marketing article that you've read that says we should analyze data this way? Maybe not. Maybe for your business, here's what's really important. But I think that everybody in your company has to be an analyst to the extent they need to know how to ask the questions in a sort of way that is knowledgeable of how data is structured for the particular customer's database, what types of questions will actually lead to positive, sort of useful outcomes. So from that way, they need to be data-driven, but not necessarily writing queries themselves. God forbid you do not want me writing queries. Yeah.
Yeah, me neither, I think. So I guess on that point, and again, this was something that quite a few of the presentations mentioned, quite a few of the guys mentioned today, was the challenge, I think, in finding that right balance is actually being nimble and being quick enough. And a lot of the stuff that you talked about, Anita, was actually if you look at a chunk of data and you look at it 7 days later, it's actually way too late to actually action on that, because the customer moves faster. The customer doesn't really think in that long period of time. It makes decisions very, very quickly. So I'm wondering, do you have any kind of piece of advice for some of the guys in the room or some of the other companies around how they structure themselves to make sure that they're actually nimble enough to make decisions very, very quickly, and to be able to be a little bit more dynamic in terms of how they make the decisions based on what the data and their insight within that data tells them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that any line of inquiry that is going to take you more than a couple of days to get to the answer of is probably not very useful, right? Unless you're looking to, like, you know, completely redo your business model or something like that. But you want to have your reporting, your people, your meetings, your analysis processes, et cetera, set up to sort of operate on at least weekly schedules, if not more so, right? So, and there's that tension between your optimizing your media spend, and, you know, that's your daily work. It takes time to do that. Every day it takes time to do that, or your email marketing, et cetera. And then there's sort of zooming up and trying to do the types of inquiry that allow you to get new insights. And I think you have to have a proper balance between that. You know, is that 80%, 20%? I don't know. You have to kind of figure out. It depends very much on the size of your business, where you are in your business, what types of problems you're trying to solve. But I think that you need to have that, the thing that we find works the best is having that sort of regular balance between the types of analysis that help you sort of make those daily optimizations and the types of analysis that allow you to kind of, like I said, zoom up, pursue a new line of inquiry, try to you know, challenge assumptions that you have, that kind of thing.
And actually, Andy, on that point, you mentioned, I think you mentioned in your presentation around traditional companies are not really set up in the best possible way to leverage data. So I think, you know, working at Google, you know, we've only existed for kind of 15 years, so we've kind of been set up with data there from the very beginning. But there's a lot of traditional companies out there that actually data has not really been central to what they've ever done, and now all of a sudden they've got all this data about their customers, about their employees, about their profits, everything. How do traditional companies kind of bring themselves up to speed in order to be able to leverage that data a little bit better? Is it, you know, is it tools, is it technology, is it people, is it, you know, I mean, I think Martin talked about it quite well. It's a bit of a mix potentially of all of them.
I think it is absolutely a mix of all of them. You know, the reality is, as I kind of touched on in the presentation, you know, a lot of it depends on the size and the culture of the organization, and ultimately, let's be honest, it's also the leadership team, you know, in terms of, you know, how are they committing to transformation? You know, and broadly we're talking about digital transformation, because digital transformation broadly is about putting the customer at the center of the business, but leveraging data and technology to be able to activate that data and connect to the customer and build a relationship, and build that kind of brand advocacy and lifetime value. So my experience is often it's a kind of test and learn scenario. So it might be taking a business problem that exists today and trying to create a kind of cross-functional team that can actually solve that problem and prove the value of data. And with that, almost the necessity, I guess, to move the organisational structure on. And that is very difficult, you know, if you're talking about, you know, large companies that have been, you know, structured in a certain way for a long time, and marketing departments that essentially have been built up around traditional marketing. That's a big shift, and it is difficult. And it almost, I think you need an evangelist within the organisation that can lead that, and whether that's working with agencies, partners, you know, whether that's building out in-house capability, whatever your operating model is. I think, you know, there has to be commitment from the top, and ideally there has to be an evangelist that can lead and push the agenda on transformation.
And Martin, you obviously deliver that from the top in Forward 3D, and you talked a little bit about culture as well in Forward 3D. I mean, how would you kind of advise other companies as to how they would go about achieving the kind of culture that you have within your company within Forward 3D?
So we work using something called Agile. So by that I don't mean that we're really flexible and good at yoga. We work. Has everyone heard of Agile as a methodology? Everyone knows what I'm talking about. So it's the Toyota method, or it's sometimes called Lean, but it's a completely different way of working. And what it says is you're not allowed to work on big tasks. You have to work on small tasks that have really short feedback cycles. So everybody pretty much has to card out what they do each day. And every day we have a stand-up meeting in the morning, each of the teams, which lasts about 20 minutes, and it says, this is what I did yesterday, this is what I'm doing today. And what you're really trying to do, to your point earlier, is you're trying to find all those things that don't work. You're trying to fail fast. And the best way of validating failing fast is with data. And that's kind of how we work. So, we have a set of values which says do the most important thing first, follow the data, etc., etc. Yeah, and that's kind of how we do it. So it's very short feedback cycles. The hard bit for us is that clients don't necessarily want very short feedback cycles initially. They think it's overly bureaucratic. The good news is once you get into a routine, then it's not uncommon for us to reprioritize every day with some clients, and they really see the value of it. It was interesting you talking about power within organizations, and does it sit with the CMO or the CFO or the CIO? I often think about there's something called like the life cycle of the marketing director. So the marketing director comes in with this big idea, and he's going to build a new website, or he's going to build a new data warehouse, and it's going to solve everything. And everyone believes him. And he comes in, and expectations are really high, and then it's delivered late, and it doesn't work, doesn't change anything, and his influence dips. And before you know it, 3 projects down the line, it's the CFO who's deciding things. We take the very opposite view. So we try and give the information to the CMO that here are 5 things, 4 of which will be completely crap, so don't do them. And go to your chief exec and say, here are 4 things we are not going to do. And it's kind of weird. You gain more reputation and more power by surfacing data objectively that says you shouldn't do something. So I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, and the guys from Opta actually talked about that as well, where they said, I think the stat was it's about 90% of it is about finding who you shouldn't sign.
Yeah, exactly.
It's kind of a similar approach, right? Just with a different application of that data.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. Let's take any questions from the audience, guys. Dave is going to bring over the mic.
Just to pick up on the transformation points, data so often is used to post-rationalize things, but obviously everyone has spoken about informing things. So when data is counterintuitive, if it tells you something you weren't expecting, I just wondered if either if it's informing a brand or an organization, how to kind of psychologically deal with counterintuitive data.
To just say it really loud.
Just shout.
That's an interesting one, though. I mean, if it doesn't say what you kind of want it to say, where does that begin? Like,
well, that's precisely what you want. Yeah. Because there are so many organisations that say, no, you can't touch the homepage, because we've always had the homepage like this. And if you're going to move conversion rate from 4% to 5%, that might not sound like a lot, but it is a lot. Then you have to be surfacing these things that look mental. But you have to do it with a bunch of people that are competent with numbers. So if you're not finding things like that, then I'd say, in a way, you're missing something.
I'd even add on to that sometimes part of that exercise, part of that evangelization is doing the work to present the data that shows them what they thought was important isn't important, right? So your whole example of the 4 things that we aren't going to do, I find works very well for those folks who say, we know that we should, go add more functionality to the product because product usage is the thing that, people should do. Well, go show them the data that shows that's actually not true. Then you sort of quietly, here you go. Here's this thing that actually does work, right? And personally, for me, that's very effective.
I think, one of the challenges is if you have a data set that doesn't show perhaps what's expected, as you say, it's counterintuitive, and somebody owns that project, or somebody, I think I know where you're coming from, that becomes difficult because then you're challenging something. I think, to Martin's point, that is exactly what you want, even though culturally sometimes that's not always easy. I think, if you can produce a data set and insight that actually shows, that perhaps, a wrong decision's being made or, potentially a wrong investment, that's absolutely what you need to do, and that's part of shifting the culture and the approach, but I know it's incredibly difficult to do it. Sometimes it's almost working out who you need to have that conversation with, and typically it tends to ultimately be the CFO or somebody in finance that is going to sign off on something. But it's not an easy one to address, absolutely.
All right, guys, we've got another question over here. Dave?
Thanks. So I think we'd all agree that there's great power in data and particularly analytics, yet we started off the session today by talking about the mismanagement of data and the potential backlash from a consumer perspective. Now, we know that consumers, well, us as individuals, we don't like the idea that we're being tracked, but we do want a personalized and relevant experience to us. So how do we go about persuading people to give up that data? Should we be looking for new sources of data? Is it something that each individual brand needs to do for their own customers, or do you think it's something much wider than that, given that we're talking about large software companies, governments, etc.?
The big P, the big privacy question.
So, you know, I think it's going to get tackled at different levels. So, you know, obviously from a privacy perspective, government, you know, EU, you know, there'll be regulatory frameworks, I guess, that are put in place. It was interesting actually because one of the, I think it was one of the slides this morning that Nigel used was really about, you know, how much to consumer does the average consumer really understand about what they're sharing, you know, how to essentially delete cookies, etc., etc. I think, so that's one thing. I think for me it's very much about ensuring that consumers are able essentially to access and control access to their own data, so they understand what they're sharing. That's one thing, you know, because if we as an industry, I just don't address that, then it will be addressed for us. It may happen anyway. I think from a consumer perspective, it's very much about a value exchange. So, you know, if through the clever use of data without being overly intrusive, you're able to create value through delivering, for example, you know, a very targeted communication that's very relevant to that individual at the time, and it creates some value, then, you know, the value exchange, I think, is probably considered to be a fair one, and therefore sharing data in reward for, you know, that very timely and relevant communication is more likely to be acceptable.
I think that's a big question. I think my first question is, why did we start a data session with that? Like terrifying Dark Knight stuff. Why? But I think there's loads of things going on. I think there are massive moral panics about data going on. I think there's a massive cult of kind of celebrity for the whistleblower. I think governments listening to your phone calls is not the same thing as Amazon recognizing that you might like an art book on Matisse. I just don't think they're the same things. I think they are being conflated, and I think it's a great media story. So I think on the marketing side, I think as long as there is a value exchange, which is a kind of wanky expression, but as long as you feel there's something good coming back to you, then you'll typically exchange your data. So if I'm in New York, in Williams-Sonoma, which sells like kitchen stuff, I will happily give them my email address because they're going to email me the receipt back. Now, I know they're going to market to me, but I happen to like them as a business. So I think if there's that value exchange, it's kind of fine. And I think we have to separate the kind of moral panic with government surveillance with marketing. I think they're not the same things.
I would say the same thing here as Martin, and then say, I don't really care. You have plenty of data already. Go do lots more with it and worry about this when, you know, bigger powers than you or I figure it out.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice summary there. Is there any other questions from the audience? One more at the back. I think this will be our final question, guys, so we let you head off in time.
Thank you guys for the presentation, really interesting today. Quick question around the customer's lifetime value that Anita has addressed today. I'm wondering, since the segment or segmenting the data, the users plays vital role into the customer's lifetime value, what would you recommend from what you've seen previously by addressing your clients? What was more important? Were these the segments that were more granular, so more niche, that have played a vital role? Or were these more the higher level segments that, you know, you would segment either by product type or by their interaction with the brand and so on? So what would you recommend?
what I'd recommend is that I have no recommendation. Unfortunately, the answer is it depends on your business. Honestly, it depends on where you are in your business. Are you sort of early in the business? Are you later in the business? It depends on what your product, your product type is. It also entirely depends upon how your competition comes into play. So if you're the, one of the things we find in the U.S. a lot is that if you're the type of business that someone's going to purchase from you primarily because you are cheaper at offering a particular product, your customer segmentation and what matters is very different from offering, for some reason, there's a whole lot of new men's underwear sites in America that are like custom-made men's underwear. So if you're doing that, custom-made or like there's some niche like the
like 3 legs.
Yes, yes, an extra wide waistband. I don't know. Anyway, my point is that the nature of your business, what your cycle of your business, the nature of your product, how customers find you, whether they need you multiple times a year or, as with men's underwear, apparently you need a lot of men's underwear. Or just once every couple years, all these factors go into it. So I think what's more important is the approach. So again, I'm a big fan of picking the low-hanging fruit. So whatever segmentation is possible within the data set that you already have, go ahead and go run that, right? That's just good people who know how to do SQL. Go run that and see if you find any soft spots, i.e. any places where you think that there's some real value to segment. And then you can get a little bit more fancy with that. That approach for me and our customers, I find works much better than saying it's about acquisition source type of segmentation. It's about first product category or segmentation. Who knows? It varies.
I don't think I can add to that. I'm wearing standard underwear. I can't add to that.
And I've got 2 legs.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
I am not a man.
On that, and you're not a man. So on that note, thanks a lot, guys. Thanks a lot to our panelists and presenters today. Thanks a million to Nigel sitting down the back there, taking some time out for hosting the day. I hope you enjoyed it. Quick one. What we're trying to do here, Dave said at the very beginning, we're trying to build a bit of community, right? So we're constantly going to be promoting said hashtag here, and we're going to continue to do these events hopefully on a quarterly basis. So watch out for the next email. We really want it to be crowdsourced as well in terms of what we talk about. As Dave said at the beginning, this is not about selling Google, so it can be anything as wild as your imagination can think of. And if we can get people who are passionate about those areas and like to come and talk about it, then we'll run with that. So keep an eye out for the follow-up email. Keep coming back. I think there's going to be a few. Anita brought some T-shirts. Brought some T-shirts from RJ Metrics. So we failed to get you T-shirts. We did try, but we failed to get you some future data T-shirts. So they'll be next time. But Anita did bring some. So grab them on the way out. There's also, I just noticed, loads and loads of food still left over. So it'd be a shame if that all goes to waste. So fill your pockets, bags, jackets, whatever you want to do. That's what people do when they come to Google. So feel free to do it with fresh pastries and buns. And hopefully we'll see you back here again in the near future. All right, thanks very much.